LoveLore Library. Chapter 136. Helene Vivian had always thought that the third prince's figure would be very good, but she didn't expect it to be so good to the point that it was pleasing to the eye. She suddenly felt that he should find a chance to go to the fragrant garden or something. He would definitely be able to sell for a good price. Saliva. The man's cold voice rang in her ears. If that kind of self-centered sitting posture were to be taken out, the group of noble ladies in the capital would definitely faint again. However, the third prince always liked to have a poisonous tongue, which was not desirable for her. Let him have his poisonous tongue. Later, she would charge him more surgery fee. Thinking of this, Helene Vivian's mouth curved into a smile. She reached out and took out the needle and thread, then smoked it under the oil lamp. Her movements were very professional, so fast that it made people dazzled. After the silver needle was done, Helene Vivian wiped the man's body temperature. It was actually higher than before. She didn't know if it was a good thing or a bad thing that he could still stay awake with a fever like this. If the other party was unconscious, she could use the knife on his body without any scruples. But he was awake, so she had to carefully serve him. She couldn't take the opportunity to see what he looked like. Helene Vivian felt uncomfortable and secretly decided to double the surgery fee. Drink the new Hong, it can stop the pain. Helene Vivian swept away the indifference and leisurely from before. She tied up the scattered hair again and carefully fixed the strands that were scattered around his ears. Her whole body emitted a cautious and evil aura. Lie down. Lie down. Beligaju raised his good-looking eyebrows. A pair of long and narrow eyes stopped at the bayonet in Helene Vivian's hand. Helene Vivian met his gaze and thin lips curved. You can also sit down, but it will hurt more when you use the knife. Beligaju faintly hummed, but didn't do anything. Helene Vivian understood his meaning and didn't say anything more. She directly took the wine and drank a mouthful, but didn't swallow it. Instead, she sprayed it all on Beligaju's wound. Following that, she picked up the silver knife and ruthlessly cut along the lines of his muscles. Beligaju's thin lips tightened as his line of sight moved upwards. A delicate and pretty little face was reflected in his clear peach blossom eyes. Being stared at by the man like this, Helene Vivian didn't panic at all. She dug out the arrowhead and began to clean the wound with cold wine. After cleaning it, she picked up a needle and stitched up Beligaju's wound. When Beligaju saw this, a faint light flashed in his cold eyes. He had seen countless famous doctors, but he had never seen such a treatment method. Was there such a treatment method in the divine land? Beligaju's eyes darkened as he asked casually, "What do you think of possession?" Helene Vivian's heart suddenly skipped a beat, but her hands remained calm as she continued, "I haven't studied it." Could it be that this man had discovered something? Helene Vivian's eyes tightened. In the divine land, the most forbidden thing was possession. The so-called possession was a change of soul from the original body. It was basically the same as her current situation. The possessor would be burned in a raging fire for 3 days and 3 nights. She didn't want to be treated as some kind of demon. That's why she hid everything and didn't even disclose her identity as the owner of Profound Heavens. Although that would bring her a lot of convenience, at the same time, there would be people watching her. Helian Guangyao wasn't stupid. Even Helian Jiao had a bit of brain. It was impossible for a person to change so much in one night. She had to take it slow and let them think that other than her change in temperament, everything else was obtained by luck. Only this way could she avoid unnecessary trouble. However, she didn't understand what the third prince meant by asking her this. Did he discover her? Or was he just casually chatting? Because after the third prince finished speaking, he didn't continue this topic. Fortunately, she reacted quickly and didn't show any abnormalities in front of this man. What if this man was just swindling her? After all, this man loved to do this kind of thing the most. Helene Vivian decided not to think about anything and just pretended that she didn't hear anything. She continued to lower her head and concentrated on bandaging him. Beligaju slowly withdrew his line of sight from Helene Vivian's face. His long and narrow eyes were filled with deep meaning. Helene Vivian thought for a while and felt that something was wrong. She paused and raised her head. "Your eyes can see now." "En." Beligaju's voice was indifferent as he responded. Helene Vivian frowned. "When can I see?" Beligaju glanced sideways and deeply looked at her. His tone was neither fast nor slow. "When you peeked at my body just now." Helene Vivian was speechless. When did she peek at his body? He made her sound so evil. She was openly admiring him, okay. Only this man could say such words in such an indifferent manner. She simply couldn't have a pleasant conversation. Helene Vivian grinned, revealing 2 small dimples. Although her smile was sweet, it definitely wasn't harmless. "Oh, right, I forgot to tell your highness. It will hurt even more later." Helene Vivian didn't do it on purpose. Once the alcohol's anesthesia wore off, the cut would start to hurt. In addition, Beligaju still had a fever. It was possible that the wound would cause him to fall into a coma. It was a good thing that it hurt a little. She was afraid that when the time came, he would be confused by the fever and wouldn't even feel pain. Helene Vivian thought of this and soaked the handkerchief in the alcohol. She didn't care about the difference between men and women. Seeing that the man's spirits were low, she would use alcohol to wipe his body. This was the best way to reduce the fever. Thus, for the entire night, Helene Vivian did the same thing. Soaking the handkerchief and wiping Beligaju's joints. Sometimes, she would even observe his wound. Gradually, Helene Vivian couldn't resist the urge to sleep. She sat on the bed and fell asleep, holding the white handkerchief in her hand. After Beligaju's fever subsided, this was the scene he saw. Helene Weiwei's little head was about to droop down bit by bit. The man's deep and narrow eyes deepened. Just as that head was about to hit the bed, Beligaju's well-defined right hand gently covered her head and successfully pressed her into his embrace. As if she was finally comfortable, Helene Vivian rubbed her small face and found a comfortable position. Like a cat, her thin lips curled up. Beligaju watched this scene and the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up into a faint smile. The next morning, the wind was gentle and the birds were chirping. Helene Vivian opened her eyes and saw a golden ray of sunlight shining in, causing her to slightly squint her eyes. Just as she was about to get up and move around, she found that she seemed to be pressing down on something hard. She slightly raised her eyes to look and saw that she was pressing down on the third prince. Chapter 137. Beligaju's masked face glowed with a faint silver light under the sunlight. He was so handsome that it was somewhat dazzling. Only, his temperament was too calm. He was so indifferent and cold that it made people feel like it was blasphemy to get close to him. Helene Vivian stared at the man in front of her. Because of the sudden change in scene, she was a bit confused. Her body also stiffened and she stopped moving. However, while she was lost in thought, Beligaju's cold voice suddenly sounded and instantly pulled her back to reality. "If you want to look at this king, then sit properly. This king is uncomfortable with you pressing down on me like this." Every word was like a gem and there was no trace of sleepiness. "Or, are you saying that you just want to throw yourself into my arms?" Helene Vivian raised her eyebrows. Her eyes moved down and she gave a cool smile. "With your highness' current state, you don't have the qualifications to criticize me." Beligaju kept his hands behind his head. His lazy appearance made it seem like the one who had a reaction wasn't him at all. He was simply an evildoer among evildoers. Helene Vivian couldn't compare to the other's face. She pulled back her hands and planned to get up. Beligaju's eyes were half closed as he looked at the woman in front of him. His expression seemed to be quite dissatisfied with losing a pillow. This king still hasn't slept enough. Helene Vivian's mouth twitched. What did he mean, this king still hasn't slept enough? What did it have to do with her whether he slept enough or not? Moreover, his posture clearly showed that he wasn't hugging a person, but a pet. How did she look like a pet? Helene Vivian was just about to use violence to subdue the third prince when she heard a slightly hoarse and deep voice with a unique coldness. In the future, don't snore when you sleep. Helene Vivian stared at him. How did she snore when she slept? Aside from personal attacks, what else could this third prince do? Isn't it tiring to live in the clouds all day long? What's the point of caring about so many details? Helene Vivian looked at the man who was close to her and secretly cursed. Even his sleeping posture was so perfect that it was abnormal. He didn't feel tired at all. She had been sleepy for a long time. Anyway, there weren't any extra beds here. After helping His Highness's fever for an entire night, her eyes were a little tired. Helene Wei adjusted her position and moved closer to the bed to take a nap. But, why were the three sovereigns lying down as well? Helene Vivian thought that a clean freak like him would get up as soon as he woke up, just like last time in Spirit Forest. Looking at the current situation, he did not intend to look for another room. There was a man lying beside her in such an unbridled manner, and the surrounding was filled with the distinct scent of dragon yen sandalwood, with a unique cold aura. Helene Vivian's line of sight couldn't help but stop at the side of his face with the mask on. The high bridge of his nose, the thin corners of his lips, and the cold lines always gave people the illusion that their hearts would stop beating. Thinking of this, Helene Vivian felt her eyelids become heavy. She simply yawned and went back to sleep. Beligaju still maintained his original position as he lay to the side. Looking at the sleeping Helene Vivian, his ink-black eyes gradually sank. The sleeping Helene Wei appeared to be very quiet. What didn't change was still that roguish aura. He didn't know where she learned it from. Her slender and thick eyelashes covered her eyelids, fluttering like a butterfly's wings. Her nose was small and delicate. The black ink on her face was a little smudged. She looked like a stupid fox that fell into the ink. However, Beligaju knew that this fox would only settle down when she was sleeping. Usually, Beligaju's eyes fell on Helene Vivian's left hand that was placed on his waist. He reached out and pinched Helene Vivian's palm. Just like what Helene Vivian said, that action didn't seem like he was pinching a person, but more like he was pinching a pet. Therefore, even now, the third prince was still considering whether or not to directly cripple this pair of scratching claws. Disobedient little thing. Bailey Jiaju's eyes darkened again as he looked at her slightly cold side profile. He pulled the quilt over and pulled Helene Wei into his embrace along with the quilt. He also planned to sleep for a while. Your Highness. Shadow tentatively called inside. In reality, he had already stayed outside for a long time, but he was afraid to disturb his master's rest. What made him surprised was that His Highness could actually tolerate someone else sleeping in the same bed as him. One had to know that His Highness's obsession with cleanliness had reached a certain level. That year, when His Highness tamed the fire Cheelant's beast form, His Highness raised it by his side and they lived together for half a month. After that, no one was able to spend the night by His Highness' side. Could it be that His Highness really intended to raise Miss Helene as a pet? Or could it be that it was because of other reasons? While Shadow was thinking, Beligaju already stood up. He was still wearing yesterday's ancient long robe, the collar was half open. With a whoosh, he pulled open the wooden door, revealing the abs that would make people jealous. The long robe on the wooden table seemed to be blown up by the wind and steadily fell on the man's shoulder. The long black robe hung straight down, showing off the perfect white skin. It brought a strong visual impact and filled the air with a familiar feeling of asceticism. The wound on his arm not only didn't make him look battered, it instead added a different kind of evil to him than usual. Shadow looked at him like this and his entire person was stunned. Combined with the conversation just now, and what Miss Hellion did to His Highness. His Highness, he couldn't have been raped by Miss Hellion, right? No, it definitely couldn't be. He must be thinking too much. Shadow shook his head. Beligaju, wearing a mink fur black robe, had a languid expression as he reclined on the wooden chair at the side. His fingers took off the silver mask, and the bright light shone on his face. One could faintly see the man's incomparably handsome side profile, as if he was the world's most perfect jade sculpture, making people unable to move their line of sight away. How is it? Bailey Jiaju extended a hand and picked up the celadone cup on the table. The joints of his hands were clearly defined, contrasting with the delicate porcelain cup. Even the space between his fingers was suffused with a pure and cold radiance like white jade. It was that kind of scholarly thin hand, but it made people feel as if it could hold the entire universe in its palm. Replying to His Highness, only one was left alive. The news was also released, saying that they provoked young Master Han. Shadow knelt on the ground and respectfully replied. The man indifferently sipped a mouthful of tea, his black eyes slightly drooping, not knowing where he was looking. He only indifferently ordered, "Continue to watch." Yes. Shadow responded, "Then, should we tell Miss Hellion about His Highness's identity at White Academy?" Beligaju's finger that was turning the silver mask paused, his expression was indifferent. "No need, everything is as usual." Yes. Shadow bowed his head and withdrew. Beligaju once again put the silver mask on his face and walked to the bedside in the inner room. His fingers rubbed Hellion Vivian's cheek, the corners of his mouth curved up devilishly. Chapter 138. When Hellion Vivian woke up again, it was already noon. The third prince was sitting by the window drinking tea. He looked unhurried, as if he was waiting for her to wake up so that he could hurry on with his journey. He had a high fever for several days, but he recovered in just one night. Hellion Vivian had never seen a person with such a strong recovery ability. However, she also didn't care. Lying on the bed and stretching, she looked at Bailey Jiaju and slowly smiled, carrying a clear and cold shrewdness. "Since His Highness is well, then let's talk about the matter of the consultation fee." Beligaju didn't say anything. He only raised his eyebrows and looked at her. He lazily leaned against the wooden chair with his legs slightly crossed. His aura was cold and luxurious. He didn't look like he was injured at all. Hellion Vivian took out a small abacus from her space and started to calculate. "One mouthful of poisonous blood is worth 10 taels. I drank about 7 mouthfuls, so a small operation is worth at least 80 taels. In addition to the night of fever rubbing, I'll give you 100 taels. The rest of the expenses are also 10 taels, so that's a total of 180 taels." Calculating to this point, she frowned. 180 taels. Why does it feel like something is wrong? Oh right, I also fed Your Highness a pill. I'll charge you 20 taels to round it up. After speaking, without waiting for the man to respond, a pair of slender white hands reached over. "The total is 200 taels. Your Highness can pay the bill." Bailey Jiaju looked at the lush and delicate fingers in front of his eyes, his extremely deep and dark eyes looked up. The rays of light refracted by the sunlight seemed to fall into his pair of slender peach blossom eyes, bright and moving. 200 taels. This woman really dared to open her mouth like a lion. He raised his eyelids and looked at the pure silver abacus in Hellion Vivian's hand. His voice was faint. "Are you short of money?" When Hellion Vivian heard this, she felt that there was hope for the money. She nodded and smiled. Beligaju leisurely put down the teacup in his hand. The silver that I won from you seems to be more than 200 taels. Is your highness planning to reconcile the accounts? Helene Vivian looked at him with clear eyes. That's a separate matter. Beligaju looked at her. After a long while, his thin lips slightly hooked. You really don't know, or pretend not to know. What? Helene Vivian felt that the third prince's appearance was an insult to her intelligence. Beligaju's eyes were clear and cold. In the Dragon War Empire, after marriage, the property is managed by the wife. Helene Vivian's outstretched hand paused for a moment. Did the royal mean that she would be in charge of the money in the future? It had to be said that sometimes, the royal family, who were indifferent to fame and fortune, also had their cute side. Helene Vivian took the abacus again. She paused, raised her head and asked, It is said that the Ghost Palace has a lot of rare treasures, is that true? Beligaju indifferently responded. There was no change in the expression on his face. Helene Vivian calculated the abacus. Also, I heard that when you were young, the retired emperor gave you a lot of tungsten and told you to play with it as you pleased. Beligaju nodded. It was just a simple action of drinking tea, but it could be seen that he had a good upbringing. Helene Vivian was angry in her heart. This was the difference between them. They were both trash. The royal family played with armaments parts like toys. She didn't even know what armaments were. She even foolishly chased after Murong Chong Fong to play with them. Thinking carefully. Did she count as marrying a tall, rich, and handsome man, and walking to the peak of life? Although it was only a contract marriage. Everything was fake. But looking at it now, it was really not bad. However, Helene Vivian wasn't used to doing nothing and only taking advantage of others. She put down the abacus and smiled faintly. Your Highness, how about giving those armaments parts in your hands to me? When the time comes to earn money, we'll split it 50-50. Beligaju finally looked at her. The corners of his mouth curved into a meaningful smile. Okay. Then let's sign the contract as soon as possible. Helene Vivian said as she took a brush from the desk and was about to start writing. In fact, Helene Vivian felt that her writing was pretty good. At least for a modern Secret Service agent, being able to use a proper brush to write without spilling ink everywhere was already pretty good. But it still made the aloof third prince, who was like a male god, frown. You use this kind of writing to enter White Academy. When Helene Vivian raised her head, her face was smeared with ink. Don't you think that my writing is very artistic? Beligaju sneered. It's really ugly to the point that other people can't understand. Helene Vivian, now she finally understood why the third prince chose her. Apart from her skin being more eye-catching at that time, there was another point. It was because the third prince wanted to attack her from time to time to highlight his own superiority. Probably because he was helpless against her, Beligaju leaned over and held the brush across the back of her hand. He lightly slid the tip of his nose down. Every word was so clear that it could directly be made into a modern copybook. Like moving clouds and flowing water, it also carried a faint domineering aura. The way he held the brush was very bold. He was born with a kind of imposing manner that controlled the overall situation. His writing was also very strong. However, this kind of posture seemed to be hugging her from behind. Helene Wei's long, shapely eyebrows creased, and she wanted to give up her position. Don't move. Bailey Jiaju's chest almost stuck to her back. His long eyebrows knitted as his slender fingertips fell. His voice was clear and cold without the slightest ripple. Done. Then, he stood up straight and looked at her condescendingly, as if he was looking at a stranger. Sure enough, she was overthinking. Helene Vivian curled her lips into a smile and gradually began to look at the contract. Some of them were written by her, and some were added by the third prince. The core idea was still the same, which was to be loving in front of others, and be strangers behind them. But there was one point. Wouldn't the scale of the wedding be too big? Did they have to announce it to the world? Helene Vivian's gaze landed on the last clause. Biting the end of the pen, she raised her eyebrows. There's no need to go through so much trouble. Just make a more ordinary wedding. The man looked up and casually glanced at her. How can my, Beligaju's, wedding be ordinary? Helene Vivian, then let's do it like this first. When we think of something, we'll add it. Helene Vivian deliberately looked at the clause of husband and wife's obligation. There was the word no written at the end. She was relieved. She took the red rouge and pressed her fingerprint. Then, with a faint smile, she pushed the paper away to Beligaju. The man half raised his eyebrows and looked at Helene Vivian. When she lowered her head, she would always reveal a piece of skin behind her neck. It was very white, very tender, and very easy to bite. Thinking of this, Beligaju's gaze was somewhat unable to move away. This place had been repeatedly lingered on last night. Chapter 139. What's wrong? Helene Vivian didn't understand why the third prince would suddenly look at her with such a gaze. But the sensitive her still sensed danger and subconsciously wanted to withdraw her hand. Beligaju was one step ahead of her and pressed down on the paper. His red fingertips fell on the paper and the imprint was clearly visible. Helene Vivian saw that everything was settled and her mind relaxed. She stood up and moved her neck, saying, "I'm going to tidy up." It could be seen that Helene Vivian was in a good mood. It was indeed like this. Basically, her biggest problem had been solved. The reason why Helene Vivian thought of a contract marriage was because the third prince wasn't easy to deal with. If he became an ally, things would be a lot easier. The second reason was that she hadn't forgotten that this was ancient times. If the retired emperor didn't like her and casually bestowed a marriage upon her because of the third prince, even if she said no, it would be considered as defying the imperial edict. Therefore, she had to think of countermeasures in advance. Now that she had a contract, everything would be done according to the contract in the future. She and the third prince would get along very well. And with this written negotiation, no matter what happened in the future, she would be able to retreat from the imperial palace unscathed. But was it really like this? Helene Vivian didn't know that when she went into the inner room to tidy up. The man sitting on the wooden chair reached out and took the paper. His deep eyes were cold and sharp like ice, as if it could pierce through a person's chest. Every word on this paper indicated that the other party wanted to keep a distance from him. Ah! Beligaju curved his cold thin lips. His slender fingers picked up the ink brush and heavily added a word, stop, under the couple's obligation. Nothing and stop. That meant that the relationship between husband and wife would never stop. Beligaju put down the ink brush and slowly folded that piece of paper. His posture was so perfect that it seemed as if all this had never happened before. The thin fog outside the window had already faded, leaving behind only a dim yellow. That was the sign of sunset. Imperial Palace, Main Hall. Emperor Murong stood by the window and pulled the black cloth off his face. He threw it aside with a gloomy expression. We failed. He didn't die. Instead, none of the secret guards we sent out returned. Then what should we do? The woman who was standing at the other end of the hall suddenly raised her head, the hair clip on her head trembling. Father, we don't have much time. The Emperor's health is getting worse and worse. He has played too much. Sooner or later, he will die in the hands of a woman. Yen is too young, she doesn't understand anything. If the Emperor left, based on how much the retired Emperor doted on that vile spawn, the throne would definitely be given to Beligaju. This consort can't wait any longer. So this woman was none other than the master of the imperial harem, Empress Murong. She tightly gripped the handkerchief in her hand. Her fingers were dyed red and emitted an unprecedented poison. He must die. Rest assured, Your Highness. Emperor Murong lowered his voice and revealed an ominous glint in his eyes. We couldn't kill him in Armament City, but that doesn't mean we can't kill him when we return to the capital. Empress Murong pinched the handkerchief and frowned. Didn't you say that vile spawn didn't bring anyone? How come none of the secret guards came back? Our people encountered young Master Han. Emperor Murong clenched his left hand. He won't be so lucky next time. Empress Murong's eyes darkened. Father, do you have a good idea? Do you still remember the maid who poisoned him that year? Emperor Murong slowly curved his thin lips. The third prince treated her differently from the others. Empress Murong's eyebrows jumped. Didn't the retired emperor dispose of her on the spot? How come she's still alive? Of course it was me who saved her. Emperor Murong's mouth slowly curved up, carrying a sinister smile. Such a useful chess piece, of course I have to make the best use of it. Empress Murong also smiled. Since it's like this, I can rest assured. I heard that the maid was a beauty since she was young. Beauty is like poison, these words aren't wrong at all. That vile spawn hasn't chosen a consort for so many years because of her. He's such a love-struck person, heh. I don't know what they'll be like when they meet. Emperor Murong's fingers slowly rubbed the wooden table. It's impossible for her to kill him again. After all, even if the third prince is dazed for a moment after seeing her, he's not stupid to that extent. Empress Murong's eyes were filled with poison. Then let him fight with the retired emperor for this lovely person. Fight until there's no end to it, just like what the emperor did for me that year. Although it's a bit difficult, with her understanding of the third prince, it shouldn't be difficult. Emperor Murong put down the porcelain cup in his hand. He believed that everyone had a cinnabar mole in their heart. Obviously, the third prince's cinnabar mole was this maid who had accompanied him for countless years in the ice-cold palace. He didn't forget that no matter who it was, they couldn't get close to the third prince. However, this maid would always be treated specially. Emperor Murong curved his thin lips. Moreover, this special treatment would be even more lethal when he grew up. Anyway, Beligaju didn't have martial chi anymore. No matter how smart he was just a teenager. It was just that the retired emperor wasn't very fond of fighting, far away, on the west side, in the Taxing Palace. How is it? The retired emperor couldn't help but stand up and ask the secret guard who hurried in from outside, Is Ju all right? The shadow respectfully kneeled on the ground and reported word for word, Don't worry, retired emperor. His Highness has already set off for the capital. There are people following him along the way. Such a thing won't happen again. That's good, that's good. The retired emperor seemed to have aged more than 10 years. He sat back in his seat and reached out to touch his forehead. Did you find out who saved Ju? The shadow looked up. Retired emperor, it said that young Master Han was also there at that time. Is it really young Master Han? The retired emperor narrowed his eyes suspiciously. Such a fierce style didn't seem like that child's style. Rather, it seemed like, the retired emperor raised his eyebrows. Go to White Academy and investigate everything that Ju has participated in recently. Then tell me the results. Yes. The shadow lowered his eyes. Wait a minute. The retired emperor's eyes deepened. That Hellion girl, what's going on? The shadow stared blankly. The retired emperor asked him like this, but he also didn't know. He didn't serve the royal family. Even if he served the royal family, he was afraid that he also couldn't guess the royal family's thoughts. The retired emperor also seemed to realize that he asked the wrong person. He waved his long sleeve. "All right, you can leave." Maybe he was thinking too much. Zhu was probably just too bored recently and wanted to find a toy for himself. Chapter 140. Early in the morning, in a comfortable carriage. The burning tea would seem to have burned out, making a muffled sound. A light, elegant, and mellow fragrance slowly wafted out from the carved red gold incense burner, lingering for a long time. This was long yen incense, nourishing the 5 viscera, spleen, and stomach. It was best for the body to smoke in the inner room. If Helene Vivian's memory wasn't wrong, this long yen incense was her mother's favorite incense in the past. However, after Madame Su married in, she took away her incense, saying that she couldn't smell it, and that it would make her sick. As a result, the entire defense division banned this incense. The servants all knew that this was the newly married second madam giving the first madam a show of strength. However, what did that good father of hers do? He protected Madame Su in all aspects, saying that her body was weak, and couldn't compare to her mother. Madame Su's body was weak, but her mother's body wasn't weak. At that time, her mother was already at the end of her life, and her chest was puffing out air. A female general of a generation galloping on the battlefield, the true head of the Helene family, had fallen to the point where she didn't even have the qualifications to light a stick of incense. No one knew what kind of heart-wrenching situation that was. The little Helene Vivian pinched the corner of her skirt, helplessly watching her own mother live such a pitiful life, but she couldn't do anything. The memories in the depths of her heart made Helene Vivian tightly shut her eyes. When she opened them again, her pupils had already become clear. No matter what happened in the past, the reborn her will definitely take back all the things that originally belonged to her. Just as she was thinking, she suddenly felt that someone was looking at her. Helene Vivian immediately restrained her baleful aura and raised her eyes towards the opposite side. Beligaju, wearing a white mink fur robe, had a languid expression as he sat on the armchair. The ancient long robe's sleeves were like blooming flowers, contrasting with his jade-like wrists. He flipped through the ancient scroll in his hand, his whole body was cold and aloof like jade. The more Helene Vivian thought about it, the more she felt that the third prince's casual movements could be photographed in a magazine. It was a pity that such a person didn't become a star. Probably sensing Helene Vivian's gaze, Beligaju glanced in her direction before opening a small wooden box in the carriage. His slender fingers rummaged through the contents before casually tossing a few pieces of tungsten armament to Helene Vivian, indicating for her to play with. Helene Vivian raised her eyebrows as she fiddled with the tungsten iron in her hand. The rumors were indeed true. Every single thing of the third prince's couldn't be measured by money alone. Even the things he used and ate were the best in the War Dragon Empire. Just by looking at this carriage, one could see a few things. A jade table, candied fruits, tea, snacks, a chessboard, a scroll, everything was prepared. Every single item was of the highest quality and was not cheap at all. It was luxurious and not just a little bit. Helene Vivian also didn't hold back. She gracefully pinched a piece of osmanthus cake and put it into her mouth. The cake melted in her mouth, and a rich flavor of mung beans accompanied by a lot of dried pears. The unique taste melted in her mouth, making her squint her eyes in enjoyment. Because she was in the carriage, in addition to the previous night's busyness, Helene Vivian didn't paint her face with the black juice that would easily cause others to misunderstand her. This made her look extremely beautiful, especially when she smiled. It was dyed with the color of autumn light, lasting for a long time. Ordinary women relied on their gentle beauty to win, but she was different. Every part of her was dyed with charm and a ruffian aura. When her black phoenix eyes looked at people, there was always a faint stubbornness. It turned out that a woman could also have such an impressive appearance. Especially those thin lips that were stained with water, appearing somewhat moist, imperceptibly revealing a sense of seduction. Beligaju lowered his eyes, with a slight depth. Hellion Vivian was eating sweetly when she saw the third prince, who was reading a book, looking at her. Is it very delicious? It was that kind of clear and noble voice that was commanding to the bone. Hellion Vivian thought that the third prince's question was definitely a foreshadowing. What he was going to say next was that a pig like her would find anything delicious to eat. She wouldn't be fooled by him. Therefore, Hellion Vivian was very smart and didn't answer. But what she didn't expect was that the third prince's next action was to hold the scroll in one hand, while the other hand reached out to hold her wrist. Then, he took the remaining half of the osmanthus cake in her hand and sent it into his indifferent thin lips. Hellion Vivian saw this scene and slightly stiffened her body. Why did she feel that the third prince's action was somewhat intimate? Moreover, for him to eat something that she had already eaten, it felt strange. But the third prince still had the appearance of an aloof male god that didn't eat the food of mortals. This made Hellion Vivian unable to pull her hand back for a while. In the past, when she was doing missions in the wild, it wasn't like there wasn't anyone who would take a bite of the compressed biscuits. Perhaps she was just thinking too much. Hellion Vivian was preparing herself mentally when the carriage wheel seemed to have hit something heavy, suddenly swaying. She was holding a teacup in one hand, while the other hand was held by the man. For a moment, she couldn't stabilize her body, but she couldn't reach out to the left side to stabilize her center of gravity, because the royal family was sitting there. She subconsciously wanted to avoid the man, but she didn't expect that he would be one step faster than her and press her entire body into his embrace. A light and elegant man's fragrance immediately filled her mouth and nose, like a lotus flower or snow. It was the same as the smell that occasionally came out of the carriage, quiet and cold. What's the matter? His voice was very light, without any emotion. The person outside the window respectfully replied, reporting to Your Highness, we don't know who put a stone on the mountain road, but it's not a big matter. Beligaju lowered his eyes and lowered his head to look at her. His beautiful peach blossom eyes slid past her eyes and fell on her messy neck. His deep eyes slightly deepened, his hand was placed on her waist that she couldn't help but hold. The temperature of his palm passed through her clothes, warming her body inch by inch. She didn't know if it was intentional or not, but his finger actually slightly rubbed against her most sensitive place. Hellion Vivian felt her entire body tremble, as a numb feeling spread from her tailbone to her forelimbs. Bailey Jiaju was naturally aware of her reaction. His eyes flickered and suddenly revealed a shallow, arrogant and evil smile. His deep and magnetic voice carried a metallic texture, just like the sound of a good cello, so sensitive. Hellion Vivian looked up and saw the sun faintly shining on that person's body. The light outlined his perfect figure, both good and evil, like a knife or an axe. When he whispered into her ear, the faint sandalwood scent brought along a kind of electric cold. This fellow, he was born to challenge a woman's self-control. Hellion Vivian had already heard that the one who lived in Ghost Palace, as long as he wanted to, he could make any girl melt into him. Unfortunately, she was not in the any girl category. Hellion Vivian turned around and beautifully sat up straight. She said in a light voice, Your Highness is thinking too much. It's just that my waist is a bit itchy, but this road is too unstable. It's better for Your Highness to stay away from me. Who knows what will happen in a while. Chapter 141. You're quite thoughtful. Bailey Jiaju did not stop Hellion Wei from leaving, as if whatever happened to her had nothing to do with him. He merely crossed his legs elegantly, one of his fingers slowly, as if rhythmically, tapped on his knee. There was a unique temperament that was a mixture of elegance and indifference between his eyebrows. He looked at Helene way lazily, an indescribable feeling in his eyes. There was elegance in his arrogance, seemingly amiable, but not easy to get close to. It made people involuntarily think of a graceful Persian cat, noble, indifferent, and astonishingly bewitching. Helene Vivian saw his expression and her thin lips raised. She really thought too much just now. The third prince was still that unapproachable man. It was just that the two of them were more familiar with each other compared to the beginning, so he would occasionally speak venomously to her for fun. Who told her to be the only one in the carriage? But don't expect him to be gentle. The third prince was like this, treating her as a business partner. When he should be aloof, he would still be aloof. Your Highness. Shadow's voice came from outside again, mixed with the sound of the wind. We're about to enter the city. Do you want to return directly to the palace or go to White Academy? Bailey Jiaju raised his hand and unhurriedly tidied up his messy sleeves. His silver mask was as noble as the moonlight, contrasting with his perfect ice-cold side profile. His imposing manner was luxurious and graceful. Go to White Academy. I won't go back with your Highness. Helene Vivian looked back with delicate features. In a while, your Highness can just put me down at the foot of the mountain. Before winning the martial chi competition and determining the princess consort, it was better for them to keep a distance. Although she and the third prince had signed a contract, but under the circumstances of not carrying it out, if the people in the academy saw her and the third prince go back together, who knows what kind of trouble it would cause. It was really troublesome. Hearing this, Beligaju's deep eyes deepened. He still had an indifferent appearance, but his thin lips were slightly pursed, adding a touch of coldness. Are you keeping a distance from me? Helene Vivian paused, but didn't hide it from him. Your Highness is too popular. I'm afraid that those who admire your Highness in the academy will see me as a thorn in their side. It's not as exaggerated as you say. Beligaju glanced at her, and the coldness in his eyes faded a lot. Helene Vivian packed up her things and didn't forget to reply with a light smile. That's because your Highness doesn't understand the jealousy of women. Like the last time, she had only met the third prince by chance in the spirit forest. After returning, rumors had spread everywhere, and every new student in the academy wished they could strangle her to death. The Helene Jiao's methods were endless. She just wanted to make her completely disappear from the White Academy. However, sometimes, Helene Vivian really wanted to know who was behind Helene Jiao and why she could be so unscrupulous. If it was just to protect the Su family, it shouldn't be to this extent. Su family. Helene Vivian narrowed her eyes, bringing out a surly feeling. Sooner or later, there would be a day when she would get rid of it. However, the problem that needed to be solved now was to properly go to the principal to cancel her leave. At that time, her master had asked for 3 days of leave for her. At that time, she had spent more than half the time fighting with the third prince. Right now, it was already the 5th day, and her master wasn't in the academy. She didn't know how the principal would punish her. Therefore, after separating from the third prince, Helene Vivian didn't immediately return to the inferior compound. Instead, she went to Tusu Feng's study. What she didn't expect was that when she went in, her deskmate was also there. He quietly stood in the deepest part of the study. He wore a pure white long robe with a slim green robe. His posture was as straight as a knife, and his face couldn't be seen clearly from afar. This made Helene Vivian feel that his appearance was very familiar. He seemed to be saying something to the principal. Helene Vivian didn't hear very clearly, but when she looked in this direction, that pair of long and narrow eyes were incomparably dark and silent, appearing particularly unfathomable. Since when did her deskmate become like this? Helene Vivian wanted to look more carefully, but she saw him turn around. With one hand in his windbreaker, he looked like an aristocrat who had walked out of a manga. That pair of eyes were as elegant and bewitching as usual. The corner of his mouth hung an arc of a smile that wasn't a smile. He looked down at her in a lonely and bewitching manner. He demonically smiled at her. My great patron has finally returned. Helene Vivian silently rubbed her aching temples. This man's words still made people think of elegant things. Why are you also here? Something came up at home, so I went back for a few days. Beligaju's voice was natural, as if this topic wasn't something important. On the contrary, little Baldy, who was eating a meat bun at the side, after hearing his words, his movements paused. His small face that was like a steamed bun stiffly wrinkled up. Although he was already used to third brother's pretentiousness, seeing it still affected his appetite. The little seventh prince began to consider whether or not he should go into seclusion and wait until third brother recovered his identity before coming out. Otherwise, it would be very tiring. He had to pay attention to what he said and couldn't get too close to third brother. It was all because those people from the superior compound were always thinking of making trouble for third brother. They even set their sights on this time's academy entrance examination, wanting to take advantage of the opportunity to bully third brother. When little Baldy thought of this, he slightly raised his head, held a meat bun, and began to observe a moment of silence for those people. Tusu Feng didn't stop his previous questioning because of Helene Vivian's entrance. He warmly curved his thin lips, and his finger pushed up the frame of his glasses that had slid down. He said, "The inferior compound wants 3 people to participate in the academy entrance examination. You 2 recommend 1 more person to the superior compound." Helene Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows. If she didn't remember incorrectly, she only came to cancel her leave. What was this academy entrance examination thing? This is White Academy's rule. There will be an academy entrance examination every year. Yuan Ming's rather ruminating voice came from the fantasy space. Every compound will send 3 people as representatives to participate in the academy entrance examination. However, you inferior compound students have never won. Every time, you've all lost miserably. Who told you to be from the inferior compound? If the student with the worst aptitude didn't lose, then there would be no justice. Helene Vivian raised her thin lips and lazily made an "oh" sound. She clearly wasn't too interested. Tusu Feng naturally also saw her expression. His eyes swept over the handwriting on the fine writing paper. It was all related to the Helene family's most famous good-for-nothing introduction. He put both hands on the table and unhurriedly said, "The academy that wins the academy entrance examination will get 100,000 taels of gold and 10 days of vacation. How about it? Do you 2 still feel that it's not interesting?" Chapter 142. Beligaju looked at him, his thin lips overflowing with evil. "I won't. Who told me to not pay my tuition fees yet? Of course I have to think of a way to earn more money." Cough. Little bald head immediately choked. Holding the meat bun, he stared with round eyes. Even someone as gentle as Tusu Feng couldn't help but twitch his mouth when he heard this answer. Wasn't this stinking brat too much of a pretense? Helene Vivian didn't care what was going on with the strange atmosphere in the study. She could find someone to practice with, and she could also earn some vacation time. There simply wasn't a better deal than this. I agree. Helene Vivian had always been efficient in doing things. However, I don't have anyone to recommend here. Apart from sleeping in class, she was usually only close to her desk mate. She didn't even recognize the rest of the people. I do. Beligaju's eyes were bewitching, his voice indifferent. Just play casually. Just bring all lie along. Little bald head played with all his might, his mouth stuffed with meat bun. He didn't say anything. According to his understanding of his third brother. Just play casually. He was referring to crushing one side to death. What's more, he was bringing along Nangong Lai, that great demon king. These 2 people together. In any case, this time he absolutely did not want to represent the superior compound in the competition. Reality proved that little seventh prince was thinking too much. Although the newly appointed elder of the superior compound wasn't as obvious as Jing Wu Wang, in his heart, he still firmly believed that to deal with those trash from the inferior compound, they simply didn't need an elite like the seventh prince. Even Murong Changfeng and Helian Jiao were used as backup support. As long as there was one expert in the starting lineup, it was enough. There was no need to waste too much time on the people from the inferior compound. On the contrary, he had always wanted to poach the He family's young master from the fine compound, so he had no choice but to pay more attention. As for the rest, he and the other students could casually eliminate them all. Helian Jiao's thoughts were the same as the superior compounds. For a martial artist like her to fight with those trash from the inferior compound was simply lowering her own standards. However, what she didn't expect was that Helian Vivian was actually on the list. Shouldn't that bitch be expelled as soon as she returned to the academy? Could it be that Helian Mei didn't do a good job? Helian Jiao's eyes darkened. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that other than being arrogant in front of others, her younger sister had no brains at all. She couldn't even do such a simple thing. Helian Mei didn't know how she had offended the Helian Jiao. Whenever she saw her, the other party had a cold attitude towards her. Helian Mei was not a good-tempered person. She clenched the handkerchief in her hand and said in an irritable tone, "Second sister, what's wrong with you? Why are you throwing a tantrum as soon as you come back?" Throw a tantrum? Helian Jiao laughed coldly. "Third sister, if father hears what you just said, you won't be able to study anymore. Why don't you take a look at where you are and speak so unruly?" Although Helian Mei was angry in her heart, she couldn't help but admit that her father had already warned her countless times. If she made another mistake, she might really be expelled from White Academy. When that time came, she could only marry an average-looking master, or even worse. She didn't want to taste that kind of feeling. "Second sister, I'm just anxious." Helian Mei muttered and softened her tone. "I'm afraid I've offended second sister." Helian Jiao knew her younger sister's weakness better than anyone else. She held the teacup and drank a mouthful of tea before slowly saying, "We're all sisters, what's there to offend? I'm saying this for your own good. Right now, your martial chi is average and you haven't had any big breakthroughs in a few years. That's pretty much it. If you don't pass the etiquette, how would your future husband be willing to marry you in the future? What second sister says is right." Helian Mei agreed with her mouth, but she wasn't happy in her heart. She wasn't a child anymore and had her own concept of honor and disgrace. Every word that Helian Jiao said about her was practically poking at her heart. If Helian Jiao's attitude was a little better, then it would have been fine. That kind of mocking tone made Helian Mei unable to feel happy when she heard it, but she also knew that she couldn't afford to offend her biological sister. "It's good that you understand." Helian Jiao saw that she had tamed her and began to talk about proper business. "The rumors that I asked you to spread, did you spread them?" Helian Mei nodded her head. "I did everything according to what second sister said. It's also that little slut's luck is good. Grandmaster Zizun personally helped her apply for leave. He said that she didn't elope with some man, but rather went to Armament City. It seems that she's planning to take the Armament Master exam." Speaking to this point, Helian Mei coldly humphed in disdain. Someone like her wants to take the Armament Master exam? She's simply looking for humiliation. It would have been fine if Helian Mei didn't mention the matter of Armament City. Once she did, the poisonous intent in Helian Jiao's eyes became even stronger. The handkerchief that she was clenching was also tightly clenched into a ball. Helian Mei observed Helian Jiao's expression. Not knowing what had happened, she was somewhat at a loss. What was going on now? Relying on good luck alone, she won't be able to go far. Helian Jower took a deep breath and put down the handkerchief in her hand. Does she think that she can rely on those methods of currying favor with others to play some fancy tricks? Ridiculous. Helian May actually agreed with this point. Second sister, you're right. I heard that the soldiers dispatched by the third prince have already withdrawn. It's clear that he's lost interest in that slut. The third prince has never been interested in her. Helian Jower's voice was cold. It's just that he couldn't get used to her way of doing things and wanted to teach her a lesson. Now that he thinks it's troublesome, he withdrew the soldiers. However, this was also good. She didn't have to worry all day long that His Highness would really see that slut in a different light. Helian May didn't expose Helian Jower's thoughts and only echoed, it's still second sister who understands the third prince. However, 2 days ago, there was a rumor in the academy that a fairy had appeared in the capital. In the capital, we've all seen those big families' young ladies. How could there be such a person? We also don't know who's playing tricks. She's just an unknown village girl. Helian Jower leaned back and blew on her red fingertips. She's covered in poverty and pettiness. She's still a fairy, huh? Helian May was stunned. Sister, you've seen her. We met face to face. Helian Jower recalled that silhouette and felt that it was familiar, yet she couldn't remember who that person looked like. She only disdainfully said, it's just that his skin is a bit whiter, that's all. When Helian May heard that it was a village girl, she didn't continue to ask and changed the topic. I heard that second sister got a good martial arts. Let me see it. It's not in my hands right now. Wait until before the martial chi competition, father will negotiate with the people over there. As Helian Jower spoke, she again thought of that boss who didn't know how to appreciate favors. When the time comes to meet her, she must properly give her a show of strength. Chapter 143. There's one thing you still don't know. Helian Jower didn't beat around the bush on the topic of armaments. She was afraid that if she said too much, her envious little sister would feel uncomfortable in her heart. She simply divulged Helian Vivian's information. Helian Vivian obtained the qualifications to enter the inferior compounds competition. As expected, Helian May's face stiffened. How is that possible? According to the Academy's regulations, each compound could only send 3 people to enter the competition. Even she, because of her poor performance last time, was eliminated by the Fine Compound's headmaster. How could that slut be so lucky? Helian Jower drank a mouthful of tea. This isn't anything strange. The students of the inferior compound are all at the Earth stage. Whether or not they pass the 3rd stage is another matter. She's also in the inferior compound. If it was another compound, she might even be at the end of the line. Helian May thought about it and also thought so. She turned her eyes and said, I heard that these 3 people each represent different subjects. I don't know which subject that slut will choose. No matter which subject she chooses, she won't pass. I reckon that she won't even have to fight with your fine compound before the inferior compound is eliminated. Helian Jower wasn't worried at all. She put down the teacup in her hand and laughed disdainfully. What's more, even if that slut wins, the other 2 people in her group won't necessarily pass. The competition rules are 3 rounds, 2 wins out of 3. Helian May also laughed. Second sister is right. The trash in the inferior compound won't be able to make any waves. It's actually a pity for that young master. Speaking to this point, a devilish smile appeared in front of Helian May's eyes. Her eyes drooped and her face heated up, dyed with a crimson red. Helian Jower wrinkled her eyebrows. That young master. He majored in divination from the inferior compound. The more Helian May spoke, the more bashful her expression became. He's different from those trash. Aside from being born in poverty, he's not inferior to anyone else. During the test, he even got first place. Helian Jiaoer didn't believe it. How could such a person be in the inferior compound? Moreover, divination was not a subject that anyone could learn. Unless one was extremely talented, no one would choose to learn divination. It's probably because his family doesn't have any power. Helian Mei sighed. Speaking of this, she felt vexed. Young Master Lai was good at everything except for this. She had ordered people to inquire about him, but they could not find anything. It could be seen that this place was too remote, and he did not have any reputation here at all. Perhaps he was the son of a concubine of some county magistrate. He wanted to be successful, so he put in a lot of effort to enter the White Academy. He was just like that young master who often stayed together with that slut, Helian Vivian. It really made her feel like she had no appetite for food, but it was a pity to throw him away. In the end, Helian Jiaoer understood this younger sister of hers. She fretfully reminded her, forget about those who don't have power. Father won't let you marry over there. I know. Helian Mei clenched her hands. Suddenly, she raised an eyebrow, as if she thought of something. Second sister, if you want me to say, that slut likes to make mischief so much. It would be better to let father directly let her marry someone who can let her live in peace. Wouldn't that be better? Helian Jiaoer coldly snorted. Do you think father doesn't want to? But don't forget, the blood flowing in her body is the true Helian blood. If she marries poorly, there will definitely be people who make irresponsible remarks. Second sister, what are you afraid of? How is the current her like the true Helian blood? Helian Mei's pair of eyes shone. Even the elders don't recognize her. Who would still treat her as a descendant? She's just a good-for-nothing. Father giving her a marriage is thinking highly of her. Hearing this, the Helian Jiaoer's mouth followed with a smile. Why didn't I think of this? You're right. The current her simply doesn't have the qualifications to be a descendant. In a moment, I'll write a letter to father and let him quickly get rid of this slut so we don't have to worry about her. Second sister still has a way. Helian Mei bore a grudge against Helian Vivian in her heart. If it weren't for that slut, she wouldn't have fallen to this state. No matter what she did, she had to look at other people's faces. It was completely different from when she was in the Defense Division's residence. Even when she married, it wasn't her who chose others, it was others who chose her. She must let that slut have a taste of what it was like to not have a choice. It would be best if father arranged for her to marry an old man and let her marry him as a concubine. After Helian Mei and Helian Jiaoer finished chatting, her entire body felt much more comfortable. Even those students from the inferior compound who were usually unpleasant to the eye didn't seem so shabby today. When they met at the Commerce Courtyard, she even chatted with those people for a while. Those who came from the border cities were petty. Their intentions to curry favor with her were very obvious, and they didn't even know how to conceal it. At the same time that Helian Mei disdained them, she also enjoyed this kind of feeling. As she walked, she waved the fan in her hand. I heard that the contestants from your courtyard have come out. Who are they? The young girls who were chatting and laughing in front immediately quieted down. Following that, they curled their thin lips. There's only one girl, Helian Vivian. I don't know why the principal chose that trash. In terms of martial ability, she's not even as strong as little sister Hongya. Little sister Hongya, why don't you say something? The one who was called little sister Hongya lazily raised her head. Her sleepy eyes were blurry, but compared to the other young girls, she had a bit more heroism. What's there to say? Since the principal chose her, then it proves that she's better than me. But with your ability, you obviously can enter the fine compound. If it wasn't for young Master He not wanting to be in the same courtyard as you, you would also. The young girl spoke until here and suddenly realized that she said something wrong. She quickly covered her mouth and laughed awkwardly. Little sister Hongye, I didn't mean it that way. Nailin Hongye glanced at her and stretched her waist. It doesn't matter. In any case, what you said is the truth. I'll leave first. In a while, there'll be self-study for martial arts. You guys can continue chatting. Why is she so unsociable? Hellion May looked at the young girl's departing figure and shook her head. She didn't say anything else. After all, Nailin Hongye's identity was there. Not only was she from a prestigious family, she was also friends with the Hay family since childhood. However, what did you guys just say? That bitch, no, I mean, my big sister, she chose martial arts. The young girls grunted in agreement. Today, during the armaments class, she was still asleep. The teacher woke her up, but she said she didn't know anything and made her stand outside for the entire class. This kind of person actually chose armaments. Do you think that our inferior compound hasn't lost enough face? After hearing what was said, Hellion May wrinkled her eyebrows. After the last time when she and Hellion Vivian had a duel, she thought that bitch would choose martial chi. She didn't expect that she would actually choose martial arts. Did she know how to assemble and disassemble martial arts? I heard that after those two young masters finished choosing, there was only martial arts left. That's why the principal arranged for that trash to choose martial arts. In any case, she'll lose no matter what she competes in. Chapter 144. The other contestants are those two young masters? Hellion May's finger that was fanning the fan paused. Didn't they say that they don't know anything? The girls looked at each other and were somewhat embarrassed. Even if they don't know anything, they are still better than the other people in our courtyard. Hellion May just said oh, and didn't continue to ask this question. It seems that what her second sister said was right. The reason why Hellion Vivian, that bitch, was chosen was entirely because the students in the inferior compound were simply not presentable. However, she had long heard of one thing. When they first entered the courtyard, those young masters from the superior compound couldn't stand those two people from the inferior compound. She didn't know how they would deal with them during the competition. In the sacrificial temple, the elders were arguing one after another because of a prophecy. Nangong Lai, who was sitting in the middle, lazily propped up his chin. He was as sloppy as he could be. Young Master Lai. The page boy walked to his side, bent down and whispered in his ear. There is news from His Highness. He wants you to stay in the academy for the next few days to participate in the academy's test. Nangong Lai's eyes lit up. Test. His Highness said that you haven't earned enough tuition fees. After the page boy conveyed this sentence, a few black lines appeared on his forehead. He really didn't know what these two masters were playing at. Nangong Lai laughed evilly. Ah, Ju is addicted to pretending. His Highness also said that someone from the superior compound recently wants to talk to you alone. When the page boy said the last sentence, Nangong Lai couldn't wait to stand up, his thin lips raised into a charming arc. Go get ready, we will go up the mountain immediately. He wanted to see which reckless people would bump into the muzzle of the gun. It's been a long time since he saw Ah Ju unilaterally beat up others. Speaking of which, since that fire, he really did behave a lot. It made people forget that once His Highness made a move, he would directly dismember people's bones. In the evening, in a corner of the commerce courtyard, the little one looked at the shadow in front of him taking a step, and he himself took a step forward shakily. Beligaju stopped and turned to look at him. His voice was neither cold nor light, without the slightest fluctuation. Go back. Third brother, when will you regain your identity? The little one's fierce little face was rounder than usual. He looked at Beligaju full of expectation. It's so boring to be alone at the superior compound. Bailey Jiaju twirled his sleeves. His handsome side profile seemed to be plated with a layer of light under the illumination of the sun. He was so indifferent that it made it difficult for people to approach him. We have already discussed this issue. I will not go there for the time being. Then how about I transfer to your inferior compound? If he wasn't worried about being seen by others, he would have hugged third brother's thigh and rolled around on the ground. Third brother, who was afraid of getting dirty, was most susceptible to this move of his. Balikaju glanced at him and reached out to rub his brother's head. He still said coldly, "No." The seventh prince's mouth twitched, and his small hands dropped down. No one could tell that this was the little Baldy who dominated the academy when he was holding a stick. Don't look at his young age. He entered White Academy earlier than anyone else. Basically, no one dared to provoke this little king of hell. Everyone felt that this was not a child at all. Putting aside his identity, he was simply a brave and resourceful little tiger. If anyone treated him as a child, they would definitely be bitten into pieces by him in the end. Some people were puzzled. When the seventh prince was young, how did the retired emperor teach him? How did he teach him to be like this? Looking at the third prince, although it made people feel cold from the bottom of their hearts, at least he wasn't that bloodthirsty. But they were all wrong. No one knew that the person who took care of the little Baldy when he was young was not the retired emperor, but Balikaju. It could be said that the seventh prince became like this because his brother told him one sentence when he was young: "Go fight. If you can't handle it, I'll help you fight." Apart from eating, the little Baldy only remembered one thing. He had his brother behind him to support him. Therefore, it was understandable that the seventh prince was raised to be a little tiger. Okay then. The little Baldy was injured. He took out a meat bun and comforted himself. I'll wait for third brother at the superior compound. Bailey Jiaju caressed the little one's head again and instructed in a low voice, "Shadow. Your subordinate is here." Shadow knelt on the ground with one knee. When he appeared, there was no sound. Balikaju's eyes were indifferent. In the future, follow the seventh prince. Whatever he wants to eat, go get it for him. The seventh prince seems to be banned from eating meat. Shadow changed his words to remind his master about White Academy's rules. Balikaju raised his eyebrows, and then. Shadow thought, and then, Master, shouldn't you be more or less apprehensive? Balikaju continued speaking, his voice without any ripples. He's not here to be a monk. Let him eat. Shadow lowered his eyes. Yes. Sigh, rules and whatnot in his highness' eyes were nothing. Little seventh prince was actually very happy. Pulling Shadow, he rushed towards the Commerce Courtyard store. Bailey Jiaju was the only one left under the shadow of the huge tree. He casually walked forward, his ink-like black hair fluttering in the wind. His outer robe was not tied with a belt, so it was draped loosely on his body. His eyelids were half closed, showing countless flirtatious thoughts. However, his facial features were indeed aesthetically pure and noble. Two kinds of extreme beauty were vividly expressed on his body. When he passed through the Commerce Courtyard streets, there would always be girls who couldn't help but look in his direction. Using Helene Vivian's words, if White Academy had a ranking of handsome men, this deskmate of hers would absolutely be the number one of the number one, steadily becoming the Academy's most handsome man. Young master, look. The servant standing next to Yuan Ling Xian stepped aside in Balikaju's direction. Yuan Ling Xian didn't care at all as he coldly humphed. The other aristocratic young masters actually curved their lips into a smile. I heard that he's in the inferior compound's list of competitors this time. He's only a clown from the inferior compound. No matter how decent he looks, he still can't compare to Yuan Gu. That's right, how can he compare to Yuan Gu? But this brat is too arrogant. Don't tell me he doesn't know this is our territory. Yuan-gu, should we go teach that brat a lesson? Someone looked towards Yuan Ling-xian's direction. Yuan Ling-xian raised his eyebrows but didn't say anything. However, one could see that his expression was somewhat displeased. Another person pulled the person who spoke back, "Your brain is muddled. Do we need Yuan-gu to personally deal with that kind of person? In a moment, we'll find a place where there's no one and tidy up that brat." Right, look at me, I'm really muddled. That person slapped his forehead, his eyes shining. "We're going now." Chapter 145. Let's go. There were 3 or 4 young masters scattered around. They weren't from the superior compound, but their families were related to the Yuan family. As younger brothers, they naturally knew who was displeasing to Yuan Ling-xian's eyes. If it were them, they also wouldn't be happy. They didn't have anything, they only had a face. What were they so arrogant for? "Young master, is it okay for them to do this?" The little servant watched the several figures disappear into the distance. Yuan Ling-xian put down the armament he was fiddling with, his tone indifferent. "What can happen? It's just a group of inferior students fighting. In 2 days, I'll be representing the superior compound in the competition. It's not convenient for me to make a move, it's better to let them settle it." "Yes." The little servant lowered his head, thinking that this time, that person would definitely be beaten into a pulp. Daring to choose the same subject as their young master, he can only blame himself for overestimating himself. At the mouth of the long alley. An exaggeratedly dressed rich young master extended his hand to block Baligaju's path, the corners of his mouth carrying a unique smile. "Inferior compound, we want to have a good chat with you." Baligaju stood tall and straight, wearing purple clothes and black hair. He didn't even lift his eyelids, one hand in the pocket of his windbreaker. His eyes were cold and detached, as if the people in front of him didn't exist. It was precisely this attitude of his that made people even angrier. The anger in those people's eyes burned even brighter. They divided into 4 directions, north, south, east, and west, pressing closer little by little, trapping Baligaju in the long alley. "You're quite arrogant. Do you know who's in charge here?" One of them was about to wave his fist at him as he spoke. However, Baligaju suddenly laughed. He blocked that person's attack with one hand and adjusted that person's collar with the other hand. Then, he suddenly used all his strength to pull that person up. That gaze of his was like a layer of ice. Without waiting for that person to react, only a creak was heard. Pain engulfed that person's entire body like a huge wave. A sharp cry resounded through the long alley. "What are you guys still standing around for? Hurry up and go." The other 3 young masters stared blankly for a moment before reacting, then they all rushed towards Baligaju. In the end, they all knelt on the ground in the same posture. This man. He dislocated their joints. No one dared to say another provocative word. Cold sweat broke out on their foreheads due to the pain. They didn't know if the other party was doing it on purpose. He could have knocked them out, but he wanted them to be conscious and feel the pain. They watched as the man walked towards them step by step. Their scalps went numb, but they couldn't resist at all. Why would a student from the inferior compound have such terrifying strength? "Didn't you want to talk to me?" Baligaju leisurely wiped his left hand that he had just touched. He slightly curved his thin lips and said, "We can talk now." The 4 bruised men wanted to cry but had no tears. They didn't want to talk anymore. They just wanted to go home. "None of you are speaking." Baligaju's voice was indifferent, as if the person who had just attacked was not him. "That's a pity." As he spoke, Baligaju raised his left leg and was about to kick one of them. Suddenly, a clear voice sounded, "Where was he when you saw him?" It was her. Belligaju's eyes flashed and he retracted his leg. Then, he grabbed one of the men's hands and punched his own face. That man was stunned. What kind of situation was this? However, his confusion only lasted for a second because in the next second, a figure swept over and kicked him in the face. Without giving him the slightest chance to speak, that woman grabbed his collar and gave him 2 punches in a row. She even twisted his wrist and sneered. Is his face something you can hit as you please? Woo, woo. How could he dare to hit his own face? That was clearly the man who had grabbed his hand and swung it at himself. He was also very astonished. What kind of person would hit themselves, bastard? Hellion Vivian frowned. What are you talking about? He probably feels wronged. Belligaju stretched out his hand and rubbed the side of his face that was beaten. His long eyebrows seemed to be furrowed because of the pain. Coupled with his long and thick eyelashes, it was easy to feel sorry for him. When Hellion Vivian saw this, she gave that man 2 more punches. You still dare to say that you are wronged? How could you do that to such a beautiful face? Woo woo woo. He was really wronged. How could he know that there was such a good actor in this world? This was the first time he beat someone up and beat himself up. What was going on? Hellion Vivian raised the corner of her mouth. What? You still don't accept it? The 4 of you beat up one person, what's there to cry about? That man shouted himself hoarse. You don't understand at all. No one can understand the pain in my heart. Let him go. Belligaju's cold voice sounded from behind. It's not good to make a scene in the academy. The other 4 young masters. You're still afraid of making a scene. If you were fucking afraid of making a scene, you wouldn't have dislocated our arms. You're letting them go so easily. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Aren't you too kind when you do things? Woo! The man in Hellion Vivian's hand was irritated again. Please. Miss, take a good look. How is this man kind? Although he didn't make us bleed, it doesn't mean that he didn't want to kill us. He said it himself when he was beating us up because he didn't like how dirty the blood was. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes. You seem to have something to tell me. That man was about to nod when he saw the man's gaze land on him. It was as deep as the night and as cold as ice. Gulp. He swallowed hard and shook his head. No, I don't want to say anything. Belligaju retracted his gaze and said indifferently, since he doesn't want to say anything, let him go. I'm not used to this kind of fighting scene. When the 4 young masters heard his words, they had goosebumps all over their bodies. They had seen liars before, but they had never seen someone who could lie so casually. Not used to it. Who the fuck was it that sent them flying with a single kick just now? He even crushed their elbows. If this woman hadn't appeared, they would have been in a worse state. Is that so? Hellion Vivian walked in front of the 4 young masters in confusion. She didn't know that the man standing behind her had a cold look in his eyes at that moment. It was full of warning. The 4 young masters shuddered at the same time. Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. Is it that scary? Although she was a little tanned, she wasn't hopelessly ugly. Why did the 4 of them look like they had seen a ghost? Chapter 146. You're not the scary one, it's the king of hell behind you. The 4 pampered sons didn't dare to say anything and hugged each other tightly. They only had one thought in their minds right now. Who could take away that seemingly indifferent and harmless, yet when it came to fighting, he would take away their lives. The key was that they couldn't even figure out his tricks. After beating someone up, he still had an expression that said, someone bullied me, come and protect me. What was going on? They were the ones being beaten up, okay. don't you think that they're a little weird? Helene Vivian smiled faintly and looked back at Beligaju. Beligaju brushed the non-existent dust off his body and frowned. Weird? The group of people's expressions changed as they shouted, "No. We don't blame you." Helene Vivian curled her lips in amusement. How can you answer your own question like that? The young masters wanted to cry but had no tears. They didn't want to, but look at the man standing next to you. His gaze was so cold, as if he would take their lives if they said one wrong word. All right. Beligaju rubbed his forehead as if he couldn't bear the pain on his cheek. Let them go back. Helene Wei grunted and casually threw the person in her hand away. She looked at those fleeing silhouettes, then looked at Bailey Jiaju's slightly flushed face. It hurts a lot. A little. Beligaju calmly replied, I can't handle 4 people by myself. Hearing this, the young masters in the distance slipped heavily. Liar. This person is lying again. He clearly beat them up to the point that even their parents couldn't recognize them, but he's still pretending. I need to apply something to reduce the swelling. Helene Wei lifted that face with her finger and looked left and right. She did not have the slightest bit of bashfulness of an ordinary girl. She slightly frowned and said, How did you hit him with such strength? I always feel that the point of contribution is a little strange. Beligaju's eyes flashed. She didn't know if it was intentional or not, but he blocked her hand. With a devilish look in his eyes, he said in a casual tone, What? Is your heart aching? Helene Wei smiled and flirted back. No matter what, you're still under my protection. Let's go. Let's deal with your injuries first, then we'll talk about what happened today. Beligaju nodded faintly. When Helene Vivian turned around, he took the white handkerchief he used to wipe his hands and threw it into the trash. His face was cold and aloof, which was unfamiliar to Helene Vivian. That was the real him. Legend had it that he had lived in seclusion for 10 years and would not step out of the Ninefold Palace unless it was absolutely necessary. He would only appear occasionally in some conversations of the royal. Fortunately, White Academy had a specialized doctor who could treat people. That doctor had probably never seen a new student with such outstanding looks like Beligaju. His aged hands were shaking. Helene Vivian leaned against the wooden medicine cabinet and casually flipped through the herbs. She looked at the man's handsome face that gradually sank. She took the iodine from the doctor's hand and dipped it in a white handkerchief. She pinched the corner of the handkerchief and gently applied it to Beligaju's face. The sun shone on her body and her whole body was covered with a golden halo. If this action was done by other girls, it would inevitably carry a trace of ambiguity. But Helene Vivian didn't have this kind of feeling. She kept the distance just right, not too close and not too far. Especially her eyes, there was a special laziness in her smile, as if she was doing something very ordinary. It's done. Helene Vivian took back the handkerchief. Beligaju didn't stop her. He was obviously used to being served by others. But that pair of dark eyes slightly raised when Helene Vivian took back her hand. Helene Vivian gave everything to the doctor and smiled as before. It's just a bit of iodine. There shouldn't be a need to pay. The doctor was dumbstruck when he took the things. Only when the 2 people walked out did he come back to his senses. He was angry in his heart. Who said there wasn't a need? The people who found people to block you were those young masters from the superior compound. Helene Vivian didn't beat around the bush and directly said, because of the competition this time. Beligaju faintly grunted and rolled up his sleeves. His appearance was neither fast nor slow. His figure and side face were both impeccable. Walking in the crowd, he was like an expensive oil painting. From time to time, people would turn their heads to look at him. It wasn't an exaggeration at all. Hellion Wei Wei felt that this environment really wasn't suitable for discussing proper business. She simply turned her head around and heaved a long sigh. Next time when you go out, you should wear a mask. Just like Third Prince. When he heard the two words mask, Beligaju's fingers paused. Seeing that Hellion Vivian didn't have any other intentions, he lightly opened his mouth. The academy has a rule that students can't wear masks. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. You still care about the academy's rules? She didn't know who it was that gave her a show of strength in front of the teacher on the first day. Beligaju smiled. Of course. The principal said to let us wait for the third contestant. Hellion Vivian curved her lips. You seem to have a good relationship with the third contestant. Why don't you use the little servant by your side to urge him? I've already urged him. Beligaju raised his eyes and swept a glance at the corridor of the inferior compound not far away. He's here. Hellion Vivian followed his gaze and saw a devilishly charming man surrounded by 3 or 4 young ladies of aristocratic families. He was talking and laughing with them without the slightest feeling of disharmony. He seemed to be able to take care of every single girl, not even the slightest bit of red powder in the midst of 10,000 flowers. Noticing their gazes, Nangong Lai faced the 2 young ladies on his left and right and smiled. He was extremely graceful. My friend is here. Can I trouble you to make way for him? Although the young ladies were somewhat embarrassed, they didn't resist his tone. They glanced at him with hidden bitterness and left with their servant girls. When they passed by Hellion Vivian, their expressions were as arrogant as a peacock spreading its tail. As usual, Hellion Vivian ignored them and lazily found a place to sit down. However, Nangong Lai looked at the 2 people who appeared together. His pair of long and narrow eyes were filled with an unprecedented playfulness. I heard that someone went to save the hero with a beauty. Hellion Vivian smiled. You're really well informed. Nangong Lai put his arm on Beligaju's shoulder with an evil smile. This hero, how does it feel to be saved by a beauty? Did those people just tell you? Beligaju leisurely glanced at him. That gaze was extremely cold. Nangong Lai's scalp went numb and he subconsciously nodded. Before he could react, he heard the man's unique voice. How do you feel about using your body to get information from a woman? Chapter 147. Pfft, Hellion Vivian couldn't control herself and let out a light laugh. Nangong Lai's entire body was choked. That devilishly handsome face alternated between red and white. It was enough to see how stifled he was. That's why it's best not to compete with a certain person. If you're not careful, you'll get yourself into trouble. You chose divination, and he chose martial qi. Hellion Wei Wei stretched lazily. The dean wants us to discuss who will be the first to go on stage. It doesn't matter. Nangong Lai leaned against the pillar behind him. When his gaze swept past Beligaju's side profile, he unexpectedly raised his eyebrows. Nangong Lai didn't care, and Beligaju didn't care either. He casually stood there with his tall figure. Up to you. Hellion Vivian used to feel that she was unorganized and undisciplined. After seeing these 2 today, she realized that she could still be considered a good student. But, the matter of who will go first, then I'll decide. The divination will take a long time, so the divination will go first. The 2 of us can still sleep below. Then I will go first, and martial qi will go last. Is that okay? Hellion Vivian once again wanted to show her democracy. Nangong Lai shamelessly muttered, I also want to sleep below. Thinking about it, how cool would it be to sleep in a row during a test? Among the 3 of you, only you don't need physical strength. Hellion Vivian curved her lips into a smile. Do people who don't need physical strength need to sleep? Nangong Lai still didn't answer. Baligaju spoke from the other side. He doesn't need it. Continue. Nangong Lai, who said he didn't need it? His divination was the most taxing on his brain. You can sleep during the divination. Hellion Vivian was originally joking. Unexpectedly, Nangong Lai's eyes lit up. That's a good idea. Shadow, who had been listening from the side from beginning to end, had a conflicted expression. Were the three of them going there to compete or to sleep? No matter what, for the sake of the prize money, we have to win. Hellion Vivian smiled gently, bringing out the warmth of a spring breeze. Aning was speechless. This time, he finally realized that money could make the world go round. White Academy's purpose for organizing this competition wasn't the prize money, right? Hellion Vivian added with a smile, and a wonderful holiday. Shadow. What happened to fighting for the reputation of the compound? I've heard that according to White Academy's practice over the years, all the participants from each courtyard have to practice in advance. Should we practice as well? Hellion Vivian paused for a moment before saying, practice together. Nangong Lai shook his head. He looked up at the sky and sighed, I'm too seductive when I'm divining. I'm afraid that you won't be able to hold on and will fall in love with this young master. Hee hee. The corners of Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. Baligaju's thin lips curved upwards. No need. 2 words. The answer he received was the same as Hellion Vivian's heart. I also feel that there's no need to practice together. Hellion Vivian stretched her body and curved her lips into a smile. If they were together, she would instead have some misgivings. As a matter of fact, the other 2 men were also the same. However, compared to Wei Wei, they didn't want to reveal any clues related to their own identities when they were practicing. When the time comes, we'll first compete with the good compound. Hellion Vivian handed over the roll of paper that the dean gave her to them. This is the good compound's list of competitors. Best of 3 wins. In other words, if the first 2 wins, the third person won't need to go on stage. Nangong Lai heard what was said and leaned over the stone table. His face was full of regret. If I had known earlier, I would have insisted on being the third person. That way, he wouldn't even need to go on stage. When facing the superior compound, the competition system will change. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. It's designated by the compound. Divination is placed in the 3rd position, which is the complete opposite of the previous position. However, we need to win against the good compound and the fine compound to be able to face the superior compound. Then it really will be a rather long competition. Nangong Lai reached out and twirled his long hair. His phoenix eyes slightly raised, carrying a different kind of pondering. Baligaju picked up the porcelain cup in front of him. Indifferent and otherworldly, his posture was graceful, and he had a strong aura of self-restraint. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. You feel that we can't win? Nangong Lai frowned. That shouldn't be the case. Although everyone said that the Hellion family's young miss was a good-for-nothing, based on his observations during this period of time, she wasn't that simple. Bailey Jiaju tidied up his sleeves, the light in his eyes was cold as he glanced at Nangong Lai. Not necessarily for a very long time. Nangong Lai was stunned. Only now did he react. He misunderstood the other's meaning. You're saying that we can definitely face the superior compound, and that we won't need that much time to deal with the good compound and the fine compound? After Nangong Lai silently confirmed it, he leisurely added another sentence. You're saying this, but have you considered the thoughts of those people from the good compound and the fine compound? Your Highness, you're only a student from the inferior compound. Even if the truth is like this, you still can't be so arrogant. However, I like this proposal. Nangong Lai smiled unrestrainedly and said to Helly and Vivian. Then it's settled. The first 2 matches will be a quick and decisive battle. Helly and Vivian sat with her legs slightly crossed. Her face didn't change much. From beginning to end, her thin lips carried a light smile that made people feel comfortable. The proposal isn't bad. However, the good compound and the fine compound aren't as easy as you think. At the very least, when you charge into the fine compound, there's the He family's young master blocking. It won't be easy. He family's young master. Nangong Lai first glanced at Beligaju, then turned his head meaningfully. He faced Helly and Vivian and said, "It seems that you have a very high opinion of him." Helly and Vivian didn't even raise her head as she looked at the scroll of paper. She replied, "He really does make people pay attention to him. I feel that he's even more powerful than some people from the superior compound." "Oh, so that's how it is." Nangong Lai dragged out his tone. His eyes looked towards Beligaju's direction. Beligaju's face didn't change in the slightest. Only, his hand that was hidden under his long sleeves was slightly sluggish. Even the cup of water in his hand rippled with layers of water. That pair of originally gentle eyes also carried a hard-to-detect iciness at this moment. Nangong Lai saw that he was sitting so steadily. He felt that it wasn't chaotic enough and added another sentence. "So you're saying that you quite admire him?" "You could say that." Helly and Vivian's finger tapped on the list of opponents to pay attention to and pushed forward a bit. Originally, she wanted the man sitting across from her to look at the young Master Yuan he would be facing in the future. However, when she came into contact with the man's pair of eyes that were as cold as ice, she couldn't help but stare blankly for a moment. "What's wrong?" Beligaju released the teacup in his hand. He smiled lazily and wickedly. The corners of his mouth were raised, but there wasn't the slightest bit of warmth in his eyes. "Nothing. Your face hurts again." Helly and Vivian could only think of this point. Her smile also faded. "Don't worry. During the finals, we'll let those young masters from the superior compound have a good taste of what it's like to have their faces slapped." Chapter 148. You've been injured by someone. Nangong Lai seemed to have heard some strange news of the world. His entire person stood up and looked at Beligaju with a thick sense of disbelief. When had the Ghost Palace's 3rd prince ever been beaten? Even if he lost his martial chi. No one dared to chirp in front of him. Not because of anything else, but because this person's methods were too ruthless. So ruthless that even those people from the 4 great clans didn't dare to act blindly without thinking. Moreover, he still held grudges. He didn't like to deal with people at the moment, but he would slowly make up for it later. Those shadow guards who tried to assassinate him were an example. Don't look at how unhurried he was in Armament City. After he came back, he went to the palace once. Just that one trip made everyone from the 4 great clans and 8 great sects panic. He didn't say who sent those shadow guards. He just said that among these people, he brought up the evidence, making those people dumbstruck and speechless. They could only look on helplessly as he investigated them one by one. Every time he investigated a family, there would always be some other matter exposed. The clan leaders of the 4 great clans had no choice but to spend more money to take care of this. What they wanted was face, and they were from a prestigious family. If some things were known by the people of the capital, they would inevitably become the common people's after-dinner joke. That was simply more unbearable than letting them suffer a beating. Now they didn't even dare to go to the brothel, afraid that 3rd prince would be unhappy and directly send people to block them in bed. Don't say that the cold and aloof 3rd prince wouldn't do this kind of thing. So far, there were already 2 elders who had been investigated by him like this. They were investigated until they had a psychological shadow. Now they couldn't get hard in front of anyone. Thinking about it carefully, originally when they were happily doing that thing, it was the moment when the men were most enjoying and most unguarded. But at this time, a knife suddenly appeared above their heads, and there were also countless shadow guards standing in the air. They didn't touch a single hair on their bodies, only gazing at them with lingering gazes. But as long as he thought of that scene, Nangong Lai's hair stood on end. That's why he believed that this kind of man would be beaten. Even if you beat him to death, he still felt that it was impossible. There must be some conspiracy. Based on his understanding of Ju, the other party must have some conspiracy. Nangong Lai looked at his good friend's calm appearance and was about to speak. He was interrupted by Beligaju's voice. There were 4 of them against me. Is it strange that I was injured? Of course. Nangong Lai originally wanted to say that it was too strange, but after seeing his gaze, his Adam's apple couldn't help but move. He forcibly changed his tone. It's not strange, fuck, what the hell is going on? Back in the day, this man used a stick to beat back more than 100 big men. After the beating, he even said not to look for him for such things in the future, and that it was a waste of his sleeping time. Now that there were only 4 of them, they couldn't beat him. Who would believe such words? What's more, he had already recovered his martial chi. That was because he was too lazy to expand his martial chi shield. Otherwise, as long as he moved his fingers, those people would instantly lie flat on the ground. What was he pretending to be? He even injured himself. From Nangong Lai's point of view, no matter how he thought about it, that so-called injury was deliberate. When Hellion Vivian went to get something midway, he couldn't bear it anymore and asked his good friend sitting beside him in a low voice. The injury on your face shouldn't have been caused by you, right? In order to use the trick of injuring himself in front of Miss Hellion and disguising himself, it was too much like something this two-faced man would do. It wasn't. Beligaju put down the porcelain cup in his hand and leaned back, indescribably languid and apathetic. The fist was someone else's. Nangong Lai deserved to be called someone who had stayed in front of Third Prince for a long time. With one sentence, he understood the other party's meaning. The corner of his mouth slightly twitched a few times. Okay, from a certain point of view, he indeed didn't hit himself. He only pressed someone else's hand and touched his face. Those people shouldn't have exposed your matter, right? Nangong Lai smiled. After fighting with you, they'll definitely feel that they had eyes but couldn't see. However, relatively speaking, your disguise also can't be concealed for much longer. When the time comes, you'll also have to go to the superior compound. Relying on the inferior compound's conditions, you won't be able to withstand those shadow guards who continuously want to assassinate you. Beligaju only curved his thin lips, demonically cold to the bone. They won't dare. It's not that they won't, it's that they won't dare. It seems that Ju must have given the other party an unforgettable lesson. Sigh, pitiful little young masters, obviously there were 2 of them. Of all the people they could have picked, they just had to pick Ju. Picking Ju wasn't as good as picking him. At the very least, his methods were still relatively gentle and wouldn't leave a shadow. He reckoned that right now, those little young masters were hugging each other and crying bitterly. Nangong Lai's guess wasn't wrong. Those 4 pampered young masters really were in so much pain that tears came out, but they still didn't dare to tell Yuanling Xian the truth. They were afraid that Yuanling Xian would think they were too useless and disdain to use them again. They also couldn't tell the truth. If they told Yuanling Xian that the new student from the inferior compound was very strong enough to be on par with you, they reckoned that not only would young Master Yuan not feel happy about their honesty, he'd even give each of them a kick, kicking them all out. Moreover, even now, they still couldn't forget that man's gaze. That kind of demonically cold from hell. Just experiencing it once was enough. They really didn't want to provoke that king of hell again. Therefore, when young Master Yuan summoned them, the majority of what they said was false. Originally, the four of us could have knocked him down. We don't know why, but Helly and Vivian went later. We were afraid that if the matter got out of hand and the dean found out, it wouldn't have a good effect on young Master Yuan, so we hastily wrapped things up and returned. Yuan Ling Xian coldly swept his eyes over the injuries on their faces. These were all done by him alone. Yes. The four of them looked at each other. Some were done by Helly and Vivian. Yuan Ling Xian wrinkled his thick eyebrows. That debauchee's recent actions are actually a bit unexpected. However, based on her strength, only you people from the good compound will lose. Young Master Yuan is right. When the four of them hung their heads, the muscles on their arms began to ache dully. Aside from being afraid of that man, there was also resentment hidden in their hearts. Young Master Yuan, you must make them suffer a bit during the competition. They even dared to move against us. They clearly don't put young Master Yuan in their eyes. Yuan Ling Xian wasn't the type of person who'd only rely on a few words to fan the flames of trouble to make his anger soar to the heavens. However, he himself found the people from the inferior compound unpleasing to the eye. Even his face carried ridicule and disdain. If they want to fight with this young master, they'll have to be able to face off against the people from the superior compound. Speaking up to hear, he turned his head and sneered. They're only a few clowns. Do you think they have that ability? Chapter 149. In the past, after Yuan Ling Xian said this kind of thing, he would always hear a wave of seconding or praising. But today, those four were exceptionally silent. This made Yuan Ling Xian couldn't help but look at them strangely. What, do you think this young master said something wrong? Those four people stared blankly at first, then shook their heads with all their might, squeezing out a stiff smile. No, how could what young Master Yuan said be wrong? Okay, if there's nothing else, you can go back. Yuan Ling Xian saw that these four people didn't even have their usual quick-wittedness, and immediately felt that there was no meaning. The little manservant standing by his side also knew how to look at things. Once he heard his master say this, he hurriedly led them out. When he returned, he had a smile on his face. Young master, this little one has inquired. The good compound has a strong man. Although his martial chi isn't good, he's very hard to deal with. With him there, he'll definitely be able to teach that arrogant brat a lesson. Tell that strong man to hit his face. If he does well, this young master will naturally give him some benefits. Yuan Ling Xian was originally a proud and arrogant person, and was also a well-known figure in his family. Even in the capital, there weren't many people who dared to provoke him. Murong Changfeng and He Zhe were fine. After all, no matter whether it was strength or family background, they were all people who were on par with him. It was this poor brat who popped out of nowhere who stole the limelight as soon as he entered the compound. Of course, Yuan Ling Xian wasn't like that Zhang family's young master who didn't have a brain at all. When he saw this kind of person, his first reaction wasn't to teach him a lesson, but to use him for himself. He hated that he, the grand young master of the Yuan family, was actually disregarded by a poor brat. He only threw him one sentence: not interested. How could Yuan Ling Xian swallow this anger? As Yuan Ling Xian's personal manservant, he naturally knew about this matter, and also understood his master's thoughts. His voice became even more respectful. Young master, rest assured. Everything will be handled by this little one. Those three people are all top-notch trash. If they're not sleeping in class, they're taking long-term leave. If it wasn't for the inferior compound not being able to select people, the principal probably wouldn't have sent them to compete. This kind of combination won't even win one of the 3 matches, let alone the superior compound. achoo. Hellion Vivian, who was helping Huan Ming Xiang sweep the floor in a corner of the commerce courtyard, sneezed heavily. She looked at the old man who was leisurely drinking tea behind her and raised her eyebrows. Elder Huan, I've already helped you with your work. The salary the academy gave you, shouldn't you give it all to me? Cough. Originally, Huan Ming Xiang, who had been humming a little tune to steal half a day of leisure, didn't drink a mouthful of hot tea. He almost choked himself. Where would this old man have any employment fee? Hellion Wei Wei propped the broom on the ground and laid on it lazily. She propped up her chin with her fingers and looked at him with amusement. A dignified elder of 3 generations sweeping the floor here, and you don't get paid? Who would believe that? Little girl, you haven't dealt with that brat Tu Su before. Don't be fooled by his appearance. He's got a lot of black water in his heart. Huan Ming Xiang angrily put down the teacup in his hand. If you ask this old man, that nephew of his learned from him. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Nephew? It's that icy brat who wears a mask all day and pretends to be mature. Hellion Vivian finally understood. The royal family had definitely offended Elder Huan in some way, which was why every word he said was related to his profession. When she heard it before, she didn't feel anything, but now that she was preparing for a contract marriage with that man, when she heard it again, she felt strange in her heart. Right, I heard that you want to represent your inferior compound in the competition. Huan Ming Xiang stroked his beard and laughed. This is also good. It's time to let them see your strength. It'll also let you make a name for yourself before the martial chi competition. Hellion Vivian rubbed the bridge of her nose and lightly laughed. My competition isn't martial chi. Not martial chi. Huan Ming Xiang was dumbstruck. Is it because that brat Tu Su didn't choose you? In a moment, this old man will go find him and have a talk. How could that brat listen to rumors? Truly hateful. Hellion Vivian's tone was indifferent. It wasn't decided by the principal. It was each of the 3 of us who chose it. She didn't care. Even if it was divination, which she didn't know anything about, she still had Yuan Ming and Xiao Bai to help her in the Xuanhuan space. It was just that if it was martial cultivation or martial chi, her chances of winning were higher. Now that she thought about it, the 3 of them seemed to be a bit too casual. Just like that, you choose one, I choose one, and the competition was set. The main thing was that the principal was too indulgent. He said that as long as they agreed to compete, they could do whatever they wanted. To tell the truth, this was the first time Hellion Vivian had met such an open-minded principal. You guys chose it yourselves. The more Huan Ming Xiang listened, the more unreliable he became. Then who chose martial chi? Hellion Vivian bent down and swept the floor, her ankles revealing heavy buckles that were hard to detect. She indifferently replied, my deskmate. You have a deskmate? Huan Ming Xiang exposed a shocked expression. Haven't you always been a loner? The corner of Hellion Vivian's mouth twitched. Everyone who goes to class has a deskmate, okay? Hearing this answer, Huan Ming Xiang still felt dissatisfied. If it was you who chose martial chi, you guys would definitely win. This old man dares to tell you that aside from that little baldy from the superior compound, there are very few people in this white academy who can beat you. Little baldy. Hellion Vivian's fingers paused. Her eyebrows lightly smiled. 7th Prince is so powerful. Huan Ming Xiang hummed twice. Isn't it that icy brat who taught him? A perfectly good little milk baby was raised like a little tiger by him. Last time, the little tiger even delivered meat buns to this old man. Early in the morning, it stood outside and called me with all its might. It was so noisy that this old man couldn't even sleep. It seems that Elder Huan really likes 7th Prince. Hellion Vivian and the old man had been in contact for a period of time. If it was someone he really hated, he definitely wouldn't let the other party find him, let alone have the opportunity to disturb him. Huan Mingxiang stroked his beard and smiled. He didn't deny it. This old man still feels that there's a problem with your arrangement. If it was you competing in martial chi, you guys could at least win one round. How about the strength of the other two people, do you understand? Wait until the competition starts, then I can slowly understand. Hellion Vivian stared blankly for a moment, then gently smiled. Huan Mingxiang. That means you still don't understand. You don't even know their strength, yet you decided on the competition for each of them. Huan Mingxiang was a bit dizzy when he heard this. When did White Academy's biggest competition become so unimportant? In the past, the students of the inferior compound clearly worked very hard to win. Hellion Vivian supported her forehead. She was actually speechless towards the old man's question. Carefully thinking about it, they really were like this. Chapter 150. What our team values is freedom of expression. Hellion Vivian thought for a long time before finally saying a satisfactory answer. After all, she still wanted to win. Huan Mingxiang was once again dumbstruck. Freedom of expression. In other words, they hadn't even gotten used to each other yet they planned to face those students from the good compound tomorrow. Can you guys really win? The old man helplessly held his forehead. It wasn't that he didn't believe in this girl, but he didn't know the details of the other two. Hellion Vivian answered with confidence this time, we must win. So confident. The old man laughed loudly. Normally, this girl was always low-key. This time, she said these words. He reckoned that she had some tricks up her sleeve. Hellion Vivian beamed as she nodded, our team is different from others. What's different? Huan Mingxiang's curiosity was piqued. Hellion Vivian rubbed her chin and deeply curved her thin lips, our goal is relatively clear. Look at money and earn a lot. This time, the dean is very generous. The winner will receive 100,000 taels. Huan Mingxiang's mouth twitched. This was the difference between their team and other teams, she said. It really was different. He had been at White Academy for so many years, but this was the first time someone participated for the prize money. Forget it. Huan Mingxiang laughed and sighed. Bring your desk mate over. Although this old man is old, I can still give him a few pointers. This old man can't help with divination, but here is an ancient book. You can keep it. Hellion Vivian thought about it and also felt that this was safer. After all, after the good compound, they would face the fine compound. They had to pay attention to Hei's strength. Letting Elder Huan give pointers always had its benefits. I'll bring him over in the evening. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly, he's still here. Huan Mingxiang nodded and stroked his beard. What attribute is that desk mate of yours? What level is he now? Never asked. Hellion Vivian guessed, he should be Earth rank. Huan Mingxiang's fingers, which were stroking his beard, suddenly froze. His eyes widened slightly, Earth rank, the lowest level. What the hell was there to compete for? He would definitely lose. Probably. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes, the light in her eyes slightly brightening. Wait until evening when I bring him here, Elder Huan can talk to him alone. Huan Mingxiang thought for a moment, then said, that's all we can do. An Earth-ranked martial artist, he had to think carefully. How many years had it been since he last saw an Earth-ranked martial artist? One couldn't blame Huan Mingxiang for having such a reaction. One had to know that as a third-generation elder of the War Dragon Empire, aside from his influence within the imperial court, he also had great attainments in martial chi cultivation. As the leader of the battle spirit forces, he could be considered a master that everyone admired. Just as he had said, he had not come into contact with an Earth-ranked martial artist since more than 10 years ago. I still have to think about how to teach him, Elder Huan, do you really plan on teaching them? After Helly and Vivian left, a cyan silhouette appeared behind Heartwarming Xiang. Won't it be too much of a waste of time? Those students from the inferior compound, aside from this Miss Hellion, the other people's aptitudes aren't that great. That's why last time you proposed to select people from the inferior compound, that's why it wasn't accepted. Now that you've given guidance to the inferior compound students alone, won't it be unfair to the competition? Heartwarming Xiang's long beard moved slightly, his white hair floating. If an Earth-ranked new student wins the competition with just a few words of guidance from this old man, then those well-known students from the superior compound and fine compound won't be able to withstand the blow. Elder Huan's meaning is to use them to temper those selected from the superior compound. The silhouette raised his eyebrows, his face gradually showing an expression of understanding. Heartwarming Xiang faintly smiled, bringing out a mysterious immortal beauty. Helly and Vivian, this girl has too many variables. Her appearance will definitely break the superiority feeling that has existed for so many years in the superior compound since the beginning. To tell you the truth, I'm still not satisfied with those selected students. I just want to give them a difficult problem and see whether or not they can deal with it. But this isn't just that girl's competition. There are still 2 other people. This old man must make sure that the others won't hold her back. At the very least, I have to guarantee 2 wins, and let her face off against the superior compound. But Earth-ranked martial artists. The silhouette was still somewhat uncertain. They won't be able to improve their abilities too much in the short span of one night. Heartwarming Xiang supported his forehead with his hand and sighed, "Do your best and leave the rest to fate." This old man only hopes that the person that the girl brings isn't a piece of wood. The sun was setting in the west, a long wind was blowing gently. White Academy, a corner of the cafeteria. In a moment, after we finish eating, come with me to a place. Helly and Vivian put down the bamboo chopsticks in her hand, looked at the man in front of her, and lazily yawned. Beligaju's posture was graceful as he used a white handkerchief to wipe the corners of his mouth. His voice was indifferent, and he only replied with one word, "Okay." This gave Helly and Vivian a kind of misconception. The other person must have been born in the aristocratic British royal family in his past life. Even the way he ate was so aesthetically pleasing. Compared to the posters of modern celebrities, he had even more of the demeanor of a devilish vampire. "You're not going to ask me where I'm taking you?" Helly and Vivian lightly smiled as she faced him and raised her eyebrows. Beligaju looked into her eyes and suddenly smiled. His bewitching coolness carried a deep seductive flavor. "What? Don't tell me you want to do something to me. Take liberties with her." Helly and Vivian raised her eyebrows, and the smile on her face became even wider. "Selling you to a small shop, you should be able to fetch a good price." Shadow, who was serving the dishes at the side, heard this, and cold sweat flowed down his back. Selling His Highness, to a small shop. Did this Miss Hellion not want to live anymore? Ah. Beligaju took the teacup, and his slender fingers tapped on the surface of the cup. His eyes were filled with rumination. "It seems that the great patron is very sure of my appearance." Helly and Vivian also poured herself a cup of tea and smiled. "Of course, don't tell me you don't look in the mirror every day." Chapter 151. This action was completely unexpected to Helly and Vivian, so when that handsome face that was enough to bewitch any girl approached, her heart skipped a beat. However, Helly and Vivian's face didn't show any expression. She didn't even flinch. Her 2 legs were slightly crossed, and her clear phoenix eyes looked straight into the other's eyes. Her smile didn't diminish in the slightest. On the contrary, the other students who were also eating uniformly looked in their direction with different expressions on their faces. "Master." Shadow stood at the side and weakly reminded. He only hoped that His Highness wouldn't flip out on the spot and smash the school cafeteria. However, Belikaju only maintained that posture with a smile that wasn't a smile. He slowly moved closer to Helene Vivian's ear and said in a low and sexy voice, "If the honored guest is you, I can actually consider selling my body and not my skills." Helene Vivian's ears heated up. She reached out and pushed him away. Looking at the living evildoer in front of her, her long, shapely eyebrows slightly raised, "Stop messing around. If we wait any longer, the sky will be dark. It's not good to make people wait. There's someone else." Belikaju also didn't have the mind to let people admire him. He leisurely adjusted his collar and glanced at Helene Vivian, his long eyebrows wrinkling. Helene Vivian made a sound and explained the situation to him. "I don't know what stage your martial chi is at, but there's no harm in increasing your own strength. It just so happens that someone suggested that they can help us with tutoring." "Oh." Belikaju lazily raised the corner of his mouth. On the surface, he looked quite interested. However, those familiar with him knew that this was mostly perfunctory. Shadow followed behind the two people, his mouth wide open. "In Dragon War Empire, there shouldn't be anyone who can tutor His Highness." Helene Vivian also knew that his enthusiasm wasn't high. Her thin lips carried a smile. "The tutor is Huan Mingxiang." Belikaju's fingers paused. He slowly raised his eyes, but didn't say anything. Shadow was completely stunned. "Elder Huan. Then wouldn't His Highness' status be, you know Elder Huan as well?" Helene Vivian's sharp eyes swept over in Ying's reaction and her phoenix eyes deepened. For a moment, Shadow was unable to react. His fingers stiffened as he tried to think of an excuse. He was afraid that one wrong word would ruin His Highness' plans. However, Belikaju merely glanced at him indifferently, and still spoke with an unhurried tone. "We've met a few times before. Elder Huan is an elder of 3 generations, there's no one in the War Dragon Empire who doesn't know him. I didn't expect you to have met before." Helene Vivian smiled. "That's good. Let's give him a surprise." On one hand, Shadow was admiring His Highness' acting skills, but on the other hand, he felt a headache coming on. He thought that this definitely wouldn't be a pleasant surprise for Elder Huan. It was more like a scare. "Yes." Belikaju's thin lips slowly curved up as he lowered his arm. "After coming to the White Academy for so long, I haven't met him yet. Indeed, I should give him a surprise." When Aning saw that smile, his body trembled. His Highness wanted to take revenge on old Huan for slandering him last time. Absolutely. However, Elder Huan doesn't want other people to know that he's in the academy. Helene Vivian shrugged her shoulders and lightly laughed. "So, you understand." Belikaju curved his lips. "I understand." As it turned out, his soft spot was here. Achoo. In a corner of the trading courtyard, an old man who was sweeping the floor suddenly sneezed. He turned his head to look. Was it going to rain soon? Why did he keep feeling that his back was cold? Huan Mingxiang rubbed his back and decided to put the matter of sweeping aside for now. He looked in the direction of the setting sun. That girl should be here in a moment. It just so happened that he could take advantage of the little time he had left to think about how to teach people. Sigh, an Earth-ranked martial artist. Huan Mingxiang couldn't help but sigh deeply. Shaking his head, he entered the library pavilion. On the other side, in the superior compound, which was filled with talents, there was a great hall within the compound that received a lot of attention. It was said that the students who could enter this great hall were all 1 in 1,000 geniuses. Here, apart from the people in charge of each compound and the dean, even the teachers didn't have the qualifications to take half a step inside. The entire hall only had a single white stone pillar that reached the sky. The incomparably luxurious night pearls were like specks of starlight adorning the night sky. Floating above the hall were armaments flashing with light. Every time someone stepped in, they would vibrate in resonance. There wasn't a single one that wasn't mysterious, there wasn't a single one that wasn't stunning. Under the dome, there was a lingering fog that didn't disperse all year round. That was a barrier propped up by a superior cultivator. It was invincible, gentle and sacred, like a fairyland, making people gasp in admiration. When Murong Changfeng, Helian Jiao, 7th Prince, as well as Yuan Ling Xian entered, they couldn't help but be shocked. Even though they were born in aristocratic families, it was also the first time they saw this kind of scene. It was almost inviolable. Some people said that this was a temple left behind from ancient times. The man who had once conquered the entire divine continent lived here. Later, the man was sealed, and this place also became a wasteland. In the end, the Dragon War Empire accepted the management, and White Academy was responsible for the reconstruction. Until today, this temple had already existed for more than 1,000 years. Its extravagance was something that no other temple could compare to. Even the imperial palace might not be able to reach this level. Today, I called you all here to tell you one thing. Tu Sufeng's black hair and white clothes slowly walked over. His voice also carried gentleness. This academy just received a notice that you all have been selected by the battle spirit forces. As he spoke, he slowly swept his gaze over the 4 people in front of him. In the end, his gaze landed on little bald head who was eating a steamed bun. With a bit of pampering helplessness, he said, "You all come from aristocratic families. There's no need for this academy to explain. You should all clearly understand what the 3 words battle spirit forces mean. This is the first time in recent years that they've selected new students. You're very lucky to have been selected as soon as you arrived." There wasn't a single person who wouldn't be excited after hearing this kind of news. No matter how arrogant Yuan Ling Xian was normally, at this moment, his face was also filled with excitement. Helian Jiao even more hated that she couldn't publicize this matter to the entire academy. Murong Changfeng was the calmest of the 3 people, but he also clenched his fists. He'd waited for this moment for too long. It could be said that in order to enter the battle spirit forces, he'd put in a lot of effort. However, the battle spirit forces also put forward a request. Tu Sufeng lowered his finger, his eyes carrying a smile. If you want to truly become a member of the battle spirit forces, you must let them see your strength. In this time's competition within the academy, the battle spirit forces requests that you all win all 4 matches. Yuan Ling Xian smiled, completely confident. That's simple. Helian Jiao also curved her red lips. Her meaning was obvious. Any one of the people from the superior compound could completely defeat the other 3 compounds, not to mention that the 4 of them were people selected by the battle spirit forces. The result was already very clear, they couldn't possibly lose. Although Murong Changfeng didn't express anything, that arrogant and imposing expression also expressed the same meaning. Only the 7th Prince, little bald head, had a slightly tangled expression. Chapter 152. Tu Sufeng glanced at them, a trace of light flashing through his eyes. His smile was warm and sincere, so to speak, you don't need to adjust your order in the competition. I've seen your name list. It says that if the inferior compound enters the finals, only Yuan Ling Xian will compete. The rest will be substitutes. Isn't this method inappropriate? To deal with those people from the inferior compound, I alone am enough. The corners of Yuan Ling Xian's mouth carried a smile, but it was hard to conceal his condescending disdain. What's more, whether or not they'll be able to last until the end and face us is another matter altogether. Tu Sufeng lightly smiled and made an "oh" sound, but didn't continue to ask Yuan Ling Xian anything. Instead, he turned his head towards the little baldy and asked, "What about you? What do you think?" The only one who knew of that brat's identity was only this little nephew of his. He really wanted to see his two brothers fight. The seventh prince looked at him with the vigor of a tiger and took a bite of the meat bun. As long as the inferior compound doesn't let me fight, I'm fine with anything else. In any case, he'd already decided that he had to avoid fighting with third brother. Only, he didn't expect that these words would have a different meaning in the ears of Yuan Ling Xian and the others. Dean, you see, even the seventh prince knows who's worth fighting with and who's not. The disdain on Yuan Ling Xian's mouth became even stronger. Even the Hellion Jiaoer on the side laughed. It's still the seventh prince who's reliable. Ah. The little baldy looked at the two laughing together, then lowered his head and took another bite of the meat bun. His cheeks bulged, and his small eyebrows wrinkled. He didn't know how to tell them that the reason he didn't compete wasn't because it wasn't worth it, but because he didn't dare. Especially after he knew that third brother chose martial chi, he didn't dare even more. He didn't want to offend third brother. When he wasn't obedient as a child, third brother made him stand outside with his little bugbear. He knew that he and the fire Qilin loved to eat meat, but he didn't let him eat. He even said that if he was seen naked, he wouldn't be able to marry a wife in the future, let alone have meat to eat. The little baldy still remembered this incident vividly. For the sake of being able to marry a wife and eat meat, he didn't commit any more crimes. He was afraid that his third brother would make him perform the rabbit dance for the palace maids again. He was a grown man now, so he couldn't be so casual. You'll be loved. Little Bald Head very seriously began to count how many palace maids would blush when they saw him ever since third brother made him do the rabbit dance. Thinking about it carefully, there were too many. His fingers were not enough. Tu Sufeng was worthy of being the one who had been with the little seventh prince the longest. With one look at the little guy's adorable tiger face, he knew that this disciple of his had started to daydream again. However, do you guys really think that those students from the inferior compound are nothing to worry about? Tu Sufeng's movements were graceful as he placed both of his hands on the table. His tone carried a deep meaning. Murong Changfeng, who hadn't spoken the entire time, smiled faintly and opened his mouth. Dean, are you trying to say that these new students were all chosen by you, so we should be extra careful? Tu Sufeng smiled. It's not because I chose them, but because they are indeed worthy of your attention. We'll take the dean's words to heart. After all, Murong Changfeng was Murong Prince Manor's heir. His words and actions were much more steady than Yuan Ling Xian's. However, the order of the competition was also decided by our superior compound's elders. We're only following orders. Since the elders feel that Ling Xian alone is enough to compete, then there shouldn't be any problems. Dean, you're currently the person in charge of the inferior compound. I can understand your feelings, but the matter of the competition should be left to its natural course. We still have to thank you for your guidance. If we really go up against the inferior compound, Ling Xian will also be extra careful. Hearing this, the smile on Tu Sufeng's lips became even wider. Since you all think this way, then this dean won't say anything more. I wish you all the best, and strive to win all 4 rounds. Yes. The 3 people smiled at each other, then walked out of the main hall one after the other. As they walked back, Yuan Ling Xian's thin lips slightly pursed. I don't know what kind of ability those pieces of trash have, for the dean to think so highly of them. The dean is the person in charge of the inferior compound. It's only natural that he'll lean towards that side. Murong Changfeng's expression was indifferent as he straightened out his sleeves. However, if we want to guarantee that the 4 rounds are absolutely safe, then we really need to change our order of appearance. However, it's not against the inferior compound, but against the fine compound. When we go up against the fine compound, we must all appear. Yuan Ling Xian thought for a moment and felt that this suggestion was very practical. He nodded and turned his head to look at the little baldy. Seventh Highness, there shouldn't be any problems with the fine compound, right? As long as it doesn't make me fight the inferior compound, it's fine. The little baldy still said the same old words. This made Yuan Ling Xian smile again. Then it settled. The rest won't change. When we go up against the fine compound, we'll all appear. Good. The Hellion Jower didn't care what the order of appearance was. In her mind, there wasn't a single compound's new student that could compare to their superior compound. Even though Yuan Ling Xian and Murong Chang Feng didn't say this, their performance was no different from the Hellion Jower. From their strategic deployment to the order of appearance, there wasn't a single thing that didn't show that only the fine compound's He family's second young master was worthy of them giving him a second glance. The rest of the people were simply no different from bystanders. However, what they didn't know was that some people lost because they underestimated their opponent and were arrogant. Just like this, the news of the battle spirit forces selecting candidates spread throughout the entire academy in less than an hour. Because the battle spirit forces required the selection of candidates to be strictly confidential, no one knew who would be selected. However, they could only think of it by association. Apart from those few geniuses from the superior compound, no one else could guess. As a result, once this news spread, the Hellion Jower and the others once again became the topic of discussion within the academy. The old man sweeping the floor listened to those students discussing one after another. His pair of eyes narrowed, but he didn't say anything. As before, he calmly held the broom, doing his job. After those students all left, he put away the broom and circled to the rear courtyard, shaking his head. The figure following beside the old man naturally saw through what he was thinking and lightly laughed. Young people can't keep their cool. Thinking back to when I was selected, I also wanted to let everyone know. That girl wouldn't be like this. After the old man finished speaking, he seemed to be angry with himself again. Forget it, forget it. Let this old man think a little, the figure laughed. Elder Huan shouldn't think for too long. What's more, once this time's competition ends, the candidates will be determined. Even if Elder Huan wants to change, you can't. Elder Huan should think carefully about how to instruct that Earth-ranked martial artist that Miss Hellion brought. Chapter 153. Hearing what was said, Huan Mingxiang's back stiffened. He silently extended his hand and took out the Earth-ranked Divine Cultivation book he found before. The more he read, the more he felt that this thing was written a bit nonsensical. However, it was enough as a guide. Huan Mingxiang turned his head and said to the shadow, "It's about time. You go do what you need to do. This old man has to keep his appointment." "Yes." The shadow respectfully withdrew. Looking at the old man's departing figure, he couldn't help but secretly sigh. This was the first time he saw Elder Huan put so much effort into someone's matter. It seemed that in Elder Huan's mind, he still felt that the eldest Miss Hellion should be chosen. Only, how could an Earth-ranked martial artist deal with the geniuses of the superior compound? The outcome of this competition was predetermined from the beginning. It was very clear that no matter how powerful the eldest Miss Hellion was, she still had no way to reverse the situation. The sun was setting. It was truly the time of encountering the devil. In a corner of the trading courtyard, the radiance slanted down, painting the surroundings into a boundless golden color. The entire earth was enveloped in an extremely enchanting orange radiance. The clear blue sky was as pure as the tranquil sea. Occasionally, a large black bird would let out a loud cry in the sky. The white clouds were like silvery white velvet, covering the azure sky. The radiance projected down from the gaps in the lush tree canopy, forming swaying specks of light around her. The specks of light were once again shattered by the enormous green tree canopy, projecting onto Hellion Vivian's face, making her squint her eyes comfortably. Following that, she stretched her body and said to Beligaju, Elder Juan should be here soon. You sit here first, I'll go out and take a look. Okay. Beligaju held the teacup in his hand, his fingertips lightly turning it. At this moment, that pair of narrow and deep eyes also seemed to be dyed with a thick golden color, giving people a kind of mixed blood charm. Helene Vivian couldn't help but think of the word evildoer in her mind. As she strolled out, Huan Mingxiang just happened to be walking over with a broom. Where's that deskmate of yours? Why don't I see him? Huan Mingxiang's originally hunched back straightened up. Once the disguise was gone, he immediately had the immortal air of an old man. Helene Vivian was just about to say that he was inside when she saw the man walking towards them. Helene Vivian turned her head and smiled at Huan Mingxiang. He's coming. Okay, but this old man has to tell you in advance, no matter how hard you train in Earth rank, you won't be able to enter. Huan Mingxiang hadn't even finished speaking when all of his words were suppressed in his throat following the appearance of that figure. Even his brown eyes widened as the figure approached. It was as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. His old face, which had always been calm, was filled with astonishment. The man's chiseled side profile looked as exquisite as an ice sculpture under the bright light, but at the same time, it revealed a sense of indifference. That indifference seemed to be dyed in color in this place, and it was even more vivid. His tall figure stood there, his amber eyes were like the pure and holy light of dusk, suffused with a cold golden light. His black robe fluttered in the wind, gracefully floating in the air like black smoke, wrapping around his slender and powerful body. Just like that inkstone ink, rice paper, and lake brush, spread out on a red sandalwood table. Every stroke of the brush, black and white, were distinct, dripping and distinct. It was as if all of the rivers and mountains were nothing more than a snap of his fingers. Huan Mingxiang looked at that unique and unmatched face and was completely bewildered. His entire person seemed to have been struck by lightning, charred on the outside and crispy on the inside. Who could tell him what was going on? How could that icy brat, who made people gnash their teeth at the mention of him, become some Earth-rank martial artist? Elder Huan, long time no see. The royal family was black-bellied. In order to avoid Helene Vivian discovering something, when Helene Vivian mentioned Huan Mingxiang, he said that he had met him once before. If this was the case, it could also explain why the old man was so surprised to see him. Huan Mingxiang heard that extremely polite voice, and his scalp went numb. He pulled Helene Vivian to the side. What's going on? What do you mean what's going on? Helene Vivian made an "oh" sound, then laughed. Only found out today that you two knew each other before. But don't worry, Elder Huan, my deskmate's mouth is very tight. He won't tell anyone about you in the academy. Huan Mingxiang became anxious. I'm not asking about this, I'm asking if he's really your deskmate. That's right. Helene Vivian raised her eyebrows in amusement. Is it so strange for me to have a deskmate? Huan Mingxiang's fingers paused. In other words, he's also in the inferior compound. Helene Vivian curved her thin lips. Elder Huan, why are you so strange today? Huan Mingxiang finally realized that something was wrong. Looking at the young girl's smiling eyes, he suddenly raised his eyebrows. You don't know that he, Elder Huan. Huan Mingxiang hadn't finished speaking when he was interrupted by a graceful and bewitching voice. Beligaju looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile. He leisurely placed the teacup in his hand to the side and leaned his body. I heard Wei Wei say that you want to guide me in martial qi. To be able to receive your guidance, I'm very honored. Huan Mingxiang really couldn't describe the feeling in his heart right now. It was a bit like eating an apple halfway and then eating a worm. He couldn't get up or down, and he was in a panic. Who could get rid of this icy brat? Seeing him, he really had a bit of indigestion. There's not much time left, why don't we chat while practicing? Beligaju strolled to Huan Mingxiang's side and smiled evilly. Just in time, I have some matters that I want to discuss with Elder Huan alone. Huan Mingxiang stretched his neck and shouted, "This old man has nothing to talk about with you." How did this junior offend Elder Huan? Beligaju raised his good-looking eyebrows and appeared to be very sad. This junior can change. If it really doesn't work out, this junior can also tell grandfather and have grandfather come to this academy to see Elder Huan. Hearing the two words grandfather, Huan Mingxiang's movement suddenly froze. He turned his head and fiercely said to Beligaju, "You, come with this old man." "Yes." Beligaju's special voice always gave people a kind of indifferent feeling when he said it, as if he was being perfunctory. Chapter 154. Besides using retired emperor to pressure people, what else do you know? Huan Mingxiang assumed a stance while glaring at Beligaju with extreme indignation. "Stinking brat." Beligaju's smile faded, and he said indifferently, "I know many other things. For example, telling everyone your identity." "You?" Huan Mingxiang gnashed his teeth. "What do you want to do?" Beligaju smiled, a trace of wickedness seeping into his bones. "What can a gigolo like me do?" When the three words, gigolo, came out, Huan Mingxiang seemed to choke and began to cough heavily. "Very good." Beligaju continued to speak, his voice neither cold nor indifferent. "It seems that Elder Huan still hasn't forgotten the matter of spreading rumors that I'm a gigolo." Huan Mingxiang looked at the side of his face, completely defeated. "I won't unmask you in front of that girl, okay?" Wasn't this the reason why this brat had suddenly interrupted him? However, what the hell was he doing? Dressing like this to White Academy, and even going to the inferior compound. If those teachers were to find out, wouldn't they go crazy? For Elder Huan to be able to do this, it's naturally not bad, but... Beligaju moved his sleeves, his low voice carrying a sense of danger. "In the future, when Elder Huan mentions me, it's best to speak according to the facts." Huan Mingxiang didn't understand and raised his eyebrows. "What do you mean by speak according to the facts?" He had never lied to anyone. For example. Beligaju paused, his eyes widening. "My heart is very soft and very kind, a husband worth entrusting a lifetime to." Huan Mingxiang heard this and the corner of his mouth twitched. His entire person felt a bit unwell. "Your heart is very soft and very kind." "You?" He really wanted to ask this icy brat, when he said these words, did he not feel the least bit ashamed? It was very clear that Beligaju didn't. He calmly withdrew his gaze, his entire body full of self-restraint. "And me? Do you believe it yourself?" Huan Mingxiang chuckled. Beligaju's gaze swept over Huan Mingxiang's face without the slightest ripple of surprise. Evaluating this sort of thing is originally meant for others to hear, to make others believe. "I believe that Elder Huan can do it." Huan Mingxiang, he was forcing him to lie with him. He had already said that this icy brat had a belly full of black water. Whoever provoked him would be reduced to ashes. "Well, since we've reached a consensus, let's start with martial chi." Beligaju paused for a moment. "What stage of martial artist did she tell you about me?" Huan Mingxiang raised his head and gazed at the sky. "Earth rank." He swore that this was the most fraudulent earth rank he had ever seen in his life. "Earth rank." Beligaju furrowed his beautiful eyebrows and pressed his fingers to his forehead. He seemed to be having a headache at this stage. He lowered his eyes and thought carefully for a moment. Then, he moved his fingers and his entire body emitted a faint yellow light. Huan Mingxiang stared blankly for a moment, his eyes surging with stormy waves. He was clearer than anyone about the strength of this brat in front of him. Ever since he became the leader of the battle spirit forces for the first year, he began to earnestly urge this icy brat to join. However, every time, he returned without success. As early as 10 years ago, Beligaju had broken through to the 10th level of the gold rank, reaching the peak that everyone envied. However, the heavens were jealous of heroic geniuses. A fire that no one could have predicted pulled this proud son of heaven down from his altar. At that time, he thought, there should be a chance now. Even if he didn't personally go out to fight, this icy brat's comprehension of martial chi could still become a well-known figure in the battle spirit forces. However, the result was still the same. Not only did he not agree, he even closed the door to everyone. So much so that when Huan Mingxiang thought of him later, he felt a burst of pity. Don't look at how he talked about Beligaju in front of Helly and Vivian. In reality, the disciple he wanted to accept the most in his life was this stinking brat. He originally thought that this person had lost all of his martial chi, but with a wave of his hand, he changed the attribute of his martial chi. This could only mean one thing. Right now, on this scoundrel's body, not only did he have the 10th level of the gold rank martial chi, but he also had other attribute martial chi. This was simply 100 years, no. A rare genius that only appears once in 1,000 years. Even if it was him, at this age, he only grasped 2 types of martial chi, and it would only appear in times of crisis. Because martial chi attributes were originally mutually restraining and nurturing, when a martial artist advanced to the next attribute, they wouldn't have the attribute of the previous level. Otherwise, it would be very easy to go berserk and break all of the meridians. Unless it was an innate ability, then one could simultaneously control more than 2 martial chi attributes. Right now, the most shocking thing was that Huan Mingxiang simply didn't know how many types of martial chi Beligaju was using at the same time. Just as he was thinking this, he saw a red light flash in front of him. When he looked at Beligaju again, his entire person seemed to have walked out from the blazing sun, his entire body was domineering and bewitching. Fire, that was the fire element. Huan Mingxiang's fingers loosened, even forgetting to exchange moves. He blankly stood in place, then suddenly laughed out loud. Good, really good. Worthy of being called the #1 young master in the world. This time, he had the confidence to make the other leaders of the battle spirit forces all agree with his words. He wanted to change. Immediately change. Helly and Vivian didn't know why Huan Mingxiang looked so excited, but when she saw the red light emitted from Beligaju's body, she also laughed. Not bad, you advanced. He withdrew his hand, and the swelling martial chi also followed suit and gradually subsided. When not even the slightest trace of the flame could be seen, Bailey Jiaju curved his thin lips and turned to look at Huan Mingxiang. His evilness overflowed. It's all because Elder Huan taught me well. At certain times, His Highness was still very modest. Like this, we can deal with the next match. Helly and Vivian turned her head, and said to Huan Mingxiang, I still have to thank Elder Huan for his guidance. Ah. Huan Mingxiang returned to his senses, lightly coughed twice, and pretended to stroke his white beard. No need to thank this old man, you just have to perform well. The best would be to win all 4 matches. At that time, he would have an even more perfect excuse to change people. Thinking about it carefully, seeing this icy fellow wasn't a bad thing. Helly and Vivian was also happy. Being able to make a huge profit, who wouldn't be happy? Huan Mingxiang once again stroked his beard, his gaze falling on the man's flawless face, his eyes full of deep meaning. Who would have thought that the Grand Third Prince would live in the inferior courtyard? It was this kind of unexpected accident that made this competition, which was originally destined to have a good ending, full of variables. He was really looking forward to tomorrow's arrival more and more. Chapter 155. Early morning the next day, a gentle breeze blew. All the students and teachers were gathered in the center of the academy. They were all dressed in green and white robes, unspeakably grand and beautiful. At this moment, at the venue's judges' table, Tusu Fong smiled as he looked at those young faces below. When his gentle and elegant eyes fell on Wei Wei and the others, a trace of profound meaning flashed through his eyes that only he himself could understand. The one sitting next to him was none other than White Academy's Master Tu Lao, who had always been absent. He smiled as he stroked the white beard on his chin. He chuckled and said, "How nostalgic. When this old man was young, it was during the Academy's examination that I found out that compared to martial chi, I was more suited for martial cultivation. Now, looking at them is like looking at myself when I was young. Truly, time waits for no man." Yes, this old man still remembers that at that time, you were also at the superior compound and participated in the competition together with Ji Zun. Yun Xiao and I were miserably oppressed by you too. The superior compound's Master Bai shook his head and said, "At that time, you were much more arrogant than you are now. You even said that even if we were old, our disciples still wouldn't be able to win against your disciples. You actually did well, accepting Lord Murong as your disciple. Ji Zun, that cold temperament, chose this and that, yet he chose a low-level martial artist who had never come into contact with martial cultivation. I really don't know what he was thinking." Tu Lao smiled and didn't answer this topic. He only said, "At that time, I was young. Looking at these children now, maybe we can meet some good seedlings. Our superior compound has a few." Master Bai faintly smiled, "Their strength is not bad. Tu Lao, you can actually consider them." Tu Lao made an "oh" sound, then said, "I actually hope to see the strength of the other compounds. It would be best if an unexpected talent appeared. This way, the competition within the academy would be even more interesting." Other compounds. Master Bai raised his eyebrows and indifferently drank a mouthful of tea. His face carried a unique arrogance. Apart from that young master from the He family, what other talents could there be? This old man has investigated the new students of the fine and good compound. As for the inferior compound, even if this old man doesn't say it, Tu Lao, you should also know what's going on over there. Wanting a talent to appear is harder than ascending to the heavens. Tu Lao put down the teacup in his hand and smiled. "Principal," hearing Master Bai's words, "don't you want to say something for your student?" Tusu Fong originally saw those people yawning and felt a little helpless at their indifferent attitude. Now that he heard these two people bring the topic to him, he gently curved his lips. "There's no need to say anything. Let's wait and see the result. It sounds like the dean thinks that those people from your academy are very promising." Master Bai laughed out loud. The ridicule was self-evident. "Dean, this old man knows that you treat all the students equally, and this is the first time you personally lead a student, so I want to make some achievements. However, no matter how much you carve rotten wood, it is not as exquisite as jade." Tusu Fong retracted his gaze from Helene Vivian and the others, and said with a noncommittal smile, "That may not be the case, the competition has not started yet, and everything is unknown. Perhaps there will be a result that Master Bai would not expect, so we should just watch the competition carefully." After saying this, he turned his head away, not caring about Bai Jingwen's expression. Bai Jingwen heavily snorted coldly. His mouth didn't say anything, but his heart disdainfully thought, what kind of unexpected result could those trash from the inferior compound have? They were only here to make up the number of people. He reckoned that they wouldn't even be able to pass the good compounds test, and would be done for. If it was up to him, then the good compound should be abolished. Their White Academy had a long history of several hundred years. Not to mention the Dragon War Empire, even in the entire Divine Continent, they could still stand a corner. It was because they had the entire Dragon War Empire's top talents here. And those commoners without any aptitude from the inferior compound were simply here to drag down the Academy's grade. Bai Jingwen lowered his head and drank a mouthful of tea. This time, if the inferior compound still couldn't make any achievements, then the clan elders would have an excuse to propose to the emperor to abolish this compound. Thinking like this, he felt very comfortable. His body leaned back, and his two hands were placed in front of him, as if he was waiting to see how the inferior compound would lose. The students didn't know what the masters were thinking. Every student from each courtyard stood in the same line, listening to the teacher announce the competition rules. The competition was arranged in order from lowest to highest. Today's match was the inferior compound versus the good compound, and the fine compound versus the superior compound. The competition was divided into 2 rounds. Whoever wanted to watch the competition would go to watch the competition according to the order. The contents of each competition were drawn up by the masters in charge. The first 2 matches had the teacher as the referee. When it came to the finals, the masters would personally judge. The most popular was Master Tu Lao. All the students wanted to use this opportunity to speak a few words with Master Tu Lao, and ask for an armament that belonged to them. Unfortunately, Master Tu Lao sat too far away. Apart from those who entered the finals who could see him, the rest of the students could only look at him from afar. Once the competition rules were set, the students quickly moved to the 2 large venues. Compared to the fine compound versus the superior compound, the inferior compound versus the good compound's venue wasn't very lively. However, there were still 20 to 30 people who came to watch the competition. Almost all of them were from the inferior compound. The good compound was very few, because they simply didn't place this competition against the inferior compound in their eyes. If they had the time to watch this competition, they might as well go to the other venue first and see the fine compound strength. When the time came, they could also provide some useful information for their own competitors. The first match, divination match, will be half an hour long. The teacher's aged and deep voice sounded. As the captain, Helene Vivian was currently lying on the wooden table to catch up on her afternoon nap. Her long chestnut hair had a strand of restless curly hair sticking up. Within her laziness was a bit of a casual feeling. Nangong Lai's lips curved into an evil smile. His pair of beautiful peach blossom eyes looked towards the young ladies watching the competition. Slightly curved, he occasionally blinked his left eye, causing countless young ladies to blush. Compared to these 2 people, Baligaju really belonged to the normal category. Only, could he not look at the chair as if it wasn't soft, clean, or luxurious enough to deserve a beating? When the teacher saw this, he expressed his anger. He stiffly tightened his grip on the name list in his hand and yelled, "The first match, divination match. Students who haven't yet entered the venue, please enter the venue as soon as possible. Your eyes are really beautiful. Perhaps after I finish the competition, we can go to the commerce compound together for a stroll." Nangong Lai didn't stop playing with electricity. Perhaps it was because he didn't have the sacred identity of the genius priest that he could be so unbridled. This made the young lady closest to him bashfully lower her eyes. She didn't even dare to raise her eyes. She softly replied, "Okay." Rip. The name list in the teacher's hand completely shattered. Chapter 156. The student participating in the divination. The teacher pointed at Nangong Lai. "That's right, it's you. Do you still want to compete or not? If you don't compete, then we'll treat it as forfeiting the competition." Nangong Lai very innocently looked back. His handsome face carried a placating expression. "Teacher, life is so beautiful, yet you're so irritable. Not good, not good. You." The teacher was so angry that his liver hurt. He was just about to say disqualify. Nangong Lai strolled over. The expression on his face changed into a murderous aura. "I'm ready." Let's begin. The teacher stared blankly. In the end, he took a deep breath. The first match between the inferior compound and the good compound begins now. As soon as his voice fell, the good compound's competitor immediately picked up the divination tool in his hand. Nangong Lai was hesitating whether or not to give the other a bit of face. After all, he was a member of a family of priests. It wasn't good for him to bully a new student with his bare hands. The good compound student standing next to him disdainfully glanced at him. Trash is trash. You take so long to choose a tool. And so, what gentleness. It was all just a passing cloud. In less than a minute, Nangong Lai finished divining the result. Under the incomparably flabbergasted gaze of the inferior compound student, Nangong Lai walked back to his original position with an evil smile. His body leaned back, slowly and unrestrainedly. He even conveniently poked Helene Vivian, who was about to go on stage. The teacher stared blankly for a long while before announcing in disbelief. This match, the inferior compound wins. Paw! The good compound student's divination tool shattered and fell to the ground. He hadn't even started yet. The second match, armament test. The teacher promptly returned to his senses and loudly announced. The teacher acting as the referee hadn't even warmed up his seat when he changed to the next one. He originally prepared a pile of explanations, but unexpectedly, not a single word was used. So stifling. So stifling. Helene Vivian yawned as she went on stage. Out of respect for the competitors, she curved her lips into a smile. She was serious and courteous everywhere. But what made her feel bad was that the other party didn't appreciate her courtesy. He arrogantly snorted and didn't have the slightest intention of talking to her. And then, the other party was thoroughly tortured to the point of tears. Under the scorching sun, this person could only stare blankly at Helene Vivian's slender and beautiful fingers, dazzling his eyes as he waited for the referee to announce the result of the match. The armament master was also a bit stunned. He looked at the xian paper spread out on the wooden table with melancholy. He asked himself why in the world he had to prepare so many explanations in the first place, in the world for what? There were indeed not many people who came to watch the competition, but everyone was dumbfounded. Other than disbelief in their eyes, there was only shock left. The students from the inferior compound, who originally didn't have any hope of winning, even asked their good friends sitting next to them, "Pinch my face. What are you doing?" His friend was also in a daze. The student said, "I want to see if it's true or not." That's right, everyone suspected that they were dreaming and shook their heads absent-mindedly. At this time, Helene Vivian and the other two had already stood up and were ready to take a stand. 2 wins out of 3. In other words, in the competition between the inferior compound and the good compound, the inferior compound won. Baligaju didn't even take the stage. His white robe hung vertically without the slightest bit of dust. His back was still cold and ascetic, as if he didn't eat the food of the common populace. He only slightly raised his eyes, but it instantly killed the hearts of countless young girls. He's really so handsome. Heavens, my heart is about to jump out of my chest. I wonder what kind of wife he'll marry in the future. Nangong Lai's foot slipped and he was exceptionally indignant. The one who took the stage was obviously me. Why was Ah Ju the most popular? This wasn't fair. Helene Vivian very unsympathetically comforted him, "Young man, don't be silly. This is an era where looks are important. Talent is only an additional point for looks." But other than disliking that stool and table, he didn't do anything else. Nangong Lai was still very unwilling. Helene Vivian glanced at him. He only needs to be responsible for being as beautiful as a flower. He doesn't need anything else. Thank you. In any case, she had already received benefits. With an extraordinarily handsome deskmate, there would be a lot of snacks. For example, the rose cake that the shy servant girl just sent over was very much to her liking. Let's say first, she wasn't the one who ate it. It was her deskmate who threw it to her. Helene Vivian actually really wanted to tell those young ladies and pretty daughters of small families to not think about using food to conquer a certain someone's heart. He looked at everything as if he was looking at a cockroach. In the beginning, Helene Vivian thought that he liked to eat it because when she first gave it to him, his thin lips even curled up slightly, carrying a bit of playfulness. But when she said that the rose cake wasn't sent by her, but by someone else, the man's pair of beautiful phoenix eyes were as cold as a piece of cold jade. Whoever he looked at would be cold. In the end, he directly threw the box of rose cakes onto the table, more unapproachable than ever. Helene Vivian thought that he must really hate the smell of roses. But it didn't matter, she liked to eat them. Let's go to the other arena to take a look. Nangong Lai smiled evilly. I just heard the young lady who admires me say that the test over there hasn't finished yet. Helene Vivian made a sound of agreement, smiled and added salt to the wound. Are you sure that young lady admires you, and doesn't want to get to know someone through you? Nangong Lai's face slightly stiffened. He glanced at the person that Helene Vivian was talking about. He still thought that a Jew wearing a mask was more attractive. Seeing this, Helene Vivian's smile grew wider. Let's go, we really should go over there to take a look. After all, it's Hei Zhe who's competing. Bailey Jia Ju's indifferent eyes paused for a moment, then slowly turned to look at her. A bewitchingly cold smile spread across his extremely handsome face. It seems that you really care about him. His strength is worthy of other people's attention. Helene Vivian smiled, the sunlight shining into her eyes. Balikaju inexplicably felt that smile was somewhat dazzling. The curve of his thin lips also became very strong, on the other side. In the competition between the superior compound and the fine compound, the first round of the divination competition was only halfway through. The situation was very intense, and it could be said that they were evenly matched. When the people watching the competition saw Helene Vivian and the others walking over, they raised their eyes with slight astonishment. Aren't they competing? Why would they appear here? It should be over. They came to watch the competition. It can't be. How long has it been and it's already over? How long does it take to deal with the people from the inferior compound? There's no need to think to know that the good compound won. What you said is right. The surrounding sounds of discussion also attracted the attention of the competition area. Helene Zhao Er, who was sitting in the candidate seat, laughed as she turned and glanced at this side. What did she say? These good-for-nothings from the inferior compound wouldn't be able to stir up any waves. They didn't even pass the first round, yet they still wanted to face off against their superior compound. Chapter 157. At this time, the divination competition was finally over. The superior compound won by a narrow margin. Little Seventh Prince's bald head also looked towards Helene Vivian and the others. Compared to other people's schadenfreude, that little face's expression was a bit hard to describe. He opened his mouth and took a bite of the meat bun. He chewed a bit and seemed to have thought of something. After that, he got up and lifted the wooden chair that was taller than himself. That relaxed appearance was the same as when he lifted the meat bun. There wasn't any difference. His strength was really frightening. The surrounding people who saw this scene forcibly sucked in a breath of air. Especially those students from the fine compound. One after another, they broke out in cold sweat for the third martial chi competitor, the He family's second young master. Wasn't this seventh prince a bit too scary? He was only 5 years old. Was it really good to be this domineering? Little seventh prince also didn't care about the surrounding gazes. He put the chair next to Hellion Vivian and the others with the vigor of a tiger. After that, he planned to move his short legs and climb up. Nangong Lai raised his good-looking eyebrows and looked at him. He did his utmost to hold back the smile at the corner of his mouth. No matter how impressive this little imp was normally, he couldn't change the fact that his legs were short. However, it was a pity that with this little girl from the Hellion family here, he couldn't hold this little imp in his arms and properly pinch him. Sigh. In order to be able to freely talk about poetry and life philosophy with the young ladies from each family, he still had to endure. After all, once his identity was exposed, it wouldn't be as fun as it was now. Little Bald Head climbed for a long time but still couldn't climb up. That pair of thick little eyebrows tightly knitted together. After that, he gave Nangong Lai a warning look. After that, his gaze fell on Beligaju again. Third brother's side profile looked especially cold. Why was this? Little Bald Head tilted his head and pondered for a moment. He silently moved the wooden chair back a bit. No matter what, he couldn't provoke him. Hellion Wei Wei looked at the little guy who didn't manage to climb up the wooden chair the first time and decided to roll up his sleeves and climb up the second time. She smiled gently, bent down and reached out, picked him up, and placed him firmly on the wooden chair. The little seventh prince was stunned as he felt the soft hair brushing past his cheeks. He subconsciously looked towards Beligaju. Beligaju also glanced at him. His thin lips seemed to move, but there was no sound. In addition, his movements were not obvious, so it did not attract anyone's attention. Only the little seventh prince knew what he was talking about. He awkwardly moved his short legs and stiffly said to Hellion Vivian, "Thank you." Hellion Vivian couldn't help but be amazed by his adorable appearance. Such a punk-style child was really rare in ancient times. What was cool and arrogant was that the meat bun never left his hand. Hellion Vivian smiled. She seemed to have thought of something. She took out the beef jerky that she had prepared earlier and handed it to him. The little seventh prince's eyes suddenly lit up. He silently raised his head, and after seeing that someone didn't say anything, he quickly took the beef jerky. Good boy. Hellion Vivian patted his head and had the urge to take him home. Good boy. Nangong Lai was very skeptical of Hellion Vivian's sense of beauty. This woman had never seen the appearance of the little rascal beating people. Holding a stick and fiercely beating people, that posture was even more arrogant than his older brothers. Gee, is this a new way to curry favor? The superior compound spectators laughed out in ridicule. Someone followed up and said, "You guys should just let her interact with the seventh prince. After all, she didn't even win the first match. If she doesn't think of some underhanded ways, how can she survive? If she wants to interact, let her interact with other people. Don't pass on the bad luck to our senior brother." Yuan Ling Xian, who still hadn't gone on stage, looked over and frowned. He then strolled over. "Seventh Highness, how come you're sitting with these people?" The little bald head raised his head and narrowed his eyes. Where he wanted to sit, was it his business? It wasn't that Hellion Vivian didn't hear Yuan Ling Xian's disdain for them. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and lazily looked over at him. Yuan Ling Xian raised his eyebrows and extended his hand, wanting to pull the seventh prince up. "Seventh Highness, it's your turn to go on stage. Let's go. The second match isn't over yet." The little bald head ate the jerky, his voice cold. "Before there's a result, you're not allowed to bother me." Yuan Ling Xian's face stiffened. He was the successor of one of the four great clans, yet he was actually being lectured by a little baby. What? The little bald head smiled like a tiger, his killing intent quite strong. "You don't like me?" Yuan Ling Xian tightly clenched his fists. "How could that be? Seventh Highness is joking. When the imperial family steps down, the first thing he'll do is kill this stinking brat." The little bald head didn't care what Yuan Ling Xian was thinking. He continued to eat the jerky and drink tea. He didn't have any other purpose sitting here, he just wanted to prove to his third brother that he was one of their people. Oh whoa, this jerky is delicious. Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows, this isn't good. Seventh Highness, it's better to go back. Probably because he was a child, he still didn't understand the difference between the courtyards. The people from the superior compound had always looked down on them. Now that the seventh prince was sitting here like this, although he wasn't very close to them, it was very likely that he would be ostracized by the students from the superior compound. Hearing this, the little seventh prince glanced at Hellion Vivian, puffed up his cheeks, and refused very coldly. It's my turn to compete, I'll go back. Hellion Vivian laughed and shook her head, asking Beligaju beside her, why does he insist on sitting here? I also want to know. Beligaju slowly smiled, that smile didn't reach his eyes in the least, after all, we're not very familiar with each other, so I don't understand. However, I guess that he should be in his rebellious phase. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows, rebellious at the age of 5. The imperial family's people should be different from other people in this aspect. Beligaju absent-mindedly glanced at the little bald head's direction, his voice sounded very casual, I heard that when the seventh prince is excited, he likes to dance naked. I don't know if it's true. Perhaps, if there's a chance, we can appreciate it in a moment. The little seventh prince's small hand that was eating the jerky fiercely paused, his face had an expression of choking. Nangong Lai, who knew the cause and effect of everything, almost couldn't hold it in anymore. He could only hold his stomach, his shoulders trembling as he leaned to the side, holding back his laughter with great difficulty. At this time, Beligaju opened his mouth again, this time speaking to the little bald head himself. His voice was charming. I don't know who is more powerful between the seventh prince and the He family's second young master. The little seventh prince's face became cold. Third brother was giving him a task. He understood. Me. He answered without the slightest hesitation, his face full of vigor. Beligaju smiled meaningfully. I'm looking forward to the scene of the seventh prince beating the He family's young master to the ground. Chapter 158. I guarantee to complete the mission. Little seventh prince nodded. However, how did that He family's young master provoke third brother? Didn't third brother say before that he was a talent? Now he wants him to go fight him. Strange, little seventh prince scratched his head, picked up the wooden chair and returned to his original position. That walking posture was very domineering. Hellion Vivian looked back and glanced at the man. You have enmity with Heizei. How could that be? Beligaju brushed away the dust on his sleeves, indifferent and harmless. I was only encouraging seventh prince, that's all. Children all need encouragement. Bullshit. Nangong Lai narrowed his eyes as he listened. He had personally watched a certain highness bring up the little brat. There was no encouragement in a certain highness way of teaching. Things definitely weren't that simple. Based on his understanding of Ju, the translation of those words just now clearly meant, little seventh prince, go, cripple him for me. Nangong Lai stroked his own smooth chin and started to recall whether or not he had just missed something. Suddenly, his eyes lit up as his gaze landed on Wei Wei's body. The corners of his mouth hooked up devilishly. So that's how it was. Ju must have sensed it himself. Things seemed to be getting more and more interesting, but regretfully, the superior compound didn't give little seventh prince the opportunity to go on stage. The second round of armaments was fought by Murong Changfeng. It could be said to be a complete victory. Everyone looked at the half-burnt sandalwood and couldn't help but sigh. Worthy of being Master Tu Lao's disciple. Lord Murong's armament strength is simply too frightening. How long has it been and he's already defeated his opponent? Worthy of being called a genius among geniuses. Master Bai listened to the discussions below and stroked his white beard. He chuckled and looked at Tu Lao. It's still your disciple who's promising. He's really bringing glory to our superior compound. Compared to the other people's exclamations, Tu Lao's mood wasn't very high. If the other person wasn't his disciple, he would have already said it. He would have definitely blocked Master Bai's words. After all, this level of speed, compared to what he saw in the Phoenix building, was simply nothing. But, sigh. He had searched almost everywhere, but he still couldn't find that girl. He didn't know where she was now. Tu Lao almost suspected that this girl wasn't someone from the War Dragon Empire. Therefore, he had been waiting for the martial chi test to be held in the capital of the Divine Land. At that time, if that girl still did not appear, he would have no choice but to give up. Tu Tian lowered his eyes filled with an unknown regret. Yuan Ming saw this scene from within the mysterious illusion space. He let out an evil laugh. Woman, your speed should be at least 3 times faster than his. Hellion Vivian didn't answer, but the smile on his thin lips explained everything. He has always looked down on you. Because you are a piece of trash, he even kicked you aside. He doesn't care about our relationship at all. As Yuan Ming spoke, his lips curled into an evil smile. I wonder what kind of expression he will have when he sees your martial talent. Hearing what was said, Hellion Vivian set her gaze on Murong Changfeng. The corners of her mouth curved. She had always been very enthusiastic about slapping that scumbag's face. Nangong Lai glanced at her and said to Beligaju with a smile that wasn't a smile. It seems that our captain still hasn't forgotten the lord that she has pursued for so long. That kind of expression isn't like her usual self. Beligaju didn't move. He didn't even lift his eyelids. Nangong Lai frowned. Could it be that he guessed wrong? Juice simply didn't care who that Miss Hellion had in her eyes. He didn't know that in the instant he was puzzled. Beligaju raised his head and followed Hellion Vivian's gaze. His bottomless eyes overflowed with ice. His lower jaw was a sharp and deadly charming line, arrogant and indifferent, but no one could deny that Murong Changfeng indeed won beautifully in this match. It could almost be considered a high-level showdown, allowing the superior compound to defeat the fine compound with an absolute advantage. According to the principle of 2 wins out of 3, little 7th Prince didn't need to go on stage. This made him very conflicted. Looking at the figure not far away, then looking at the heavy buckle he took off, he very seriously made a decision. He vigorously walked towards the fine compound side of the arena and stood in front of He Zhe, who was in the middle of comforting his teammate. His voice was steady. Find some time and let's duel. This. He just won, and now he wants to find someone to duel. Little 7, are you sure you're not provoking him? You're not rubbing salt in his wound. Tu Sufeng had a headache and used his hand to support his forehead. Just as he was about to laugh, someone over there handed over the results of the inferior compound and good compounds competition and even leaned over to say something in his ear. This time, Tu Sufeng really did laugh, but there was also something else in his helplessness. On the other side, He Zhe was stunned by 7th Prince's murderous aura. He began to recall where he had offended the little one. After thinking for a long time, he still couldn't think of a reason. He could only raise his lower lip. I refuse. Refused? What to do? Could it be that this time, he really wouldn't be able to escape the misfortune of having to dance around naked? Little 7th Prince expressed that he was very distressed. He didn't even eat the meat bun as he sat in place and began to think of a strategy. In the end, he pattered in front of Beligaju and said with a serious expression, I'll leave young Master He to you. That's right, right now he was gambling on how much third brother hated that young Master Hay. If the degree was ordinary, he would always command others to make a move. If the degree was very deep, third brother would probably prefer to do it himself. N. Beligaju raised an eyebrow at him. That end word was very tasteful, and the end of his voice carried a trace of iciness. That's fine too. Then I'll properly entertain young Master Hay in 7th Prince's place. Nangong Lai, you're the one I wanted to hit from the beginning. Using little 7 as an excuse, can you be any more shameless? Helene Vivian watched this interaction between the adult and child and felt that it was very interesting. You two shouldn't have known each other before, right? Little 7th Prince's tiger back stiffened, and he didn't speak. Beligaju calmly glanced back and used the same excuse as when he met Huan Mingxiang. We've met a few times. I'm actually surprised that 7th Prince actually still remembers this one. Remember, N. Little 7th Prince vaguely responded. He used the dried meat to rub his teeth, afraid that his teeth would be crooked if he lied. Helene Vivian still felt that it was strange, and she was just about to ask something. Those people from the fine compound sneered. You can't even beat the people from the good compound, yet you still want to win against our captain. Why don't you take a good look at yourself and see how much weight you have?